Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's eManifest session. We're going to have a fun session today. We're going to do a lot of walkthrough, real-life scenarios. We've got two great presenters with us this morning. Very lucky to have both of them. I'll give you a brief intro in a second. Just remind everybody, if they could, to make sure the cell phones are on silent, please. So as you know, with the eManifest, we're getting down to the end state, and it's the largest electronic initiative the agency has undergone. So today we're going to deal with realisms of eManifest in all modes, but primarily in the road. And you hear a lot of new terms which will become the new norm moving forward, terms such as ATD, Advanced Trade Data, SNP, Secondary Notified Party, and Manifest Forward, which is the forwarder piece. You'll also be introduced today, and I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear, we have two friends joining us from the South today. Joe from Arkansas. Joe from Arkansas will be here today, and I think Billy Bob from Louisiana is joining us as well. So I think we should have some fun. They're our favorite guys. We've really talked about them a lot in the last 4 years. So hopefully they'll be here to join us this morning. So without introduce our two speakers this morning. First of all, Oryst Dydynsky, and Oryst is the principal with DAP International Trade Consulting Services, and consults with Descartes Group and cross-border and regulatory affairs. And I guess I've had the pleasure of working with Oryst on many occasions in the last 3 or 4 years through different organizations, and you'll have a lot of fun with Oryst this morning because he really brings it down to the practical level that we all like to work with in the real world. There's the flow charts, but there's the real world that we have to deal with every day. So I think, when the tire hits the pavement. His role is to serve as a source for trade community on the most current trade and technological solutions available, and to streamline the movement of freight across the border. After a 30-year career with Canada Customs, where he was part of a changing and evolving customs process, Mr. Dydynsky brought his experience to both ViaSafe and Descartes to assist the trade community in complying with a vast array of new security initiatives that are now part of the new normal in the international trade environment. Mr. Dydynsky was the project manager for several border initiatives to streamline the movement of imported goods to Canada and the U.S., including pre-arrival system PARs, which we hope to hear today they're going to make mandatory, frequent importer release first, new import systems developed for CFIA, and custom self-assessment, CSA FAST, for carrier driver. Now, with DAP and continuing in the consulting role with Descartes, Mr. Dydynsky is leading the way for the new carrier advanced reporting requirements, ACE and ACI. So what we'll do this morning is we'll walk through the presentations. We'll have a break at 10:15. Sean from our U.S. office, our U.S. manager, is going to present our solution on the ACE, ACI carrier piece. And we'll go right into Q&A, and I really want to encourage everybody to sort of dialogue on the Q&A side of it. This is our chance to, deal with two great speakers and get to the bottom of any questions that we have, any concerns, anything out there. From the broker's side of the shop, we are still we aren't in negotiations any longer. I guess the negotiations are over on the ATD data set. It's something we fought for. We wanted to take control of the ATD data set. We aren't. It's going to be able to be provided based on the importer giving permission to whomever is wanting to do it, carriers, airlines, steamship lines. So we'll get into in depth about the ATD data set and when it needs to be filed and what it means to importers and brokers. Our second presenter this morning is James Spina, and I'm really pleased that James took the time today. He's finishing his career. This is his last presentation, so we're really pleased to have James because we've worked with James, and I know Oryst and James work well together on these presentations across the country. So it's been a good touch for us to be able to have James before he leaves the service, the agency, after 29 years, and he's going to Italy for 3 weeks, I believe. Yeah, for a nice vacation, well-deserved. So James has had 29 years of service with CBSA. He began his career at Border Service Officer and was promoted to Superintendent, and has worked as the Chief of Operations in both land border and air operations. This operational experience has included a number of years in both the travelers and commercial environment. James also spent 6 years with CBSA National Training and Learning Directorate, delivering training in both the recruit program and advanced drug enforcement areas. During his tenure there, he completed 2 international training assignments as representative of Canada and the Canada Border Service Agency in both Bermuda, what a lucky touch that was, and the Cayman Islands. Is that where all the money is? James is a certified mediator and was a full-time alternate dispute resolution advisor almost 6 years. In 2007, James was promoted as manager of the Regional Client Services Unit in the Trade Compliance Division. During his 3 years in the division, 1/3 of that time was spent as acting director. In August 2010, James was invited to join the eManifest Directorate as Senior Program Advisor and Stakeholder Consultations and Implementation Division. So can we give a hand to our 2 speakers this morning? Thank you. So, Mr. D, you get the mic?
All righty. My name is Oryst Dydynsky, and this is my 42nd year in this business. It's the first 30, as Rod said, are with customs. So there was a period of time there where I was in Ottawa, capital punishment, where I was with customs, and basically we were involved in many of the things that are at the border today. I was a project manager on many of the items that are working there today. And then, of course, that 9/11 hit, and it changed everything from the standpoint of security. So what we want to do today is we want to be able to walk through kind of the end state. Where is this all headed? There's all sorts of initiatives that really started almost 15 years ago and slowly moved forward until where we are today with eManifest and electronic processing. So I want to be able to take you to 2015, 2016 to show you where we're going to be at end state. And then we'll bring you back to today. And James is going to come up and give you the rules and the regulations, okay? And he'll lay down the law of what has to happen, and we'll go over some of that stuff. This is your session today, so don't be afraid to ask a question. If something doesn't make sense, or we use an acronym that's not quite right, or something doesn't make sense, please just say, "Excuse me, can you just explain that?" Don't be shy about that at all. I'm really like a nuts and bolts guy. I get right down to the grassroots, and I'm going to be a driver, and I'm going to be an invoice, and I'm going to be a barcode, and we're going to walk through a typical shipment coming into Canada that we're going to see each and every day, and as we're seeing today, and how importers involved, how the carriers involved. So we'll get all of that. So when you leave here today, you're going to be a lot smarter about eManifest and where we're going to be headed in the future. So let's take that first slide. So I consult with Descartes. I used to work for Descartes. They purchased a company that I was part of, and I stayed with them until I was 60. I'm 63 now, and as I said, I've been 42 years in this business. I have 4 beautiful grandchildren, by the way, 3 daughters and a son, a grandson. So that keeps me hopping as well. It's a semi-retirement. So what I do is consult with them, and I do things like this for Rod and the companies and brokers and freight forwarders, and we go across the country how many times? I don't know. I've lost track of how many times we've been to coast, Chicago and Detroit and various other areas talking to anybody who will listen, because you got to be ready for this, okay? It's one of those things that it's inevitable. Customs is positioning themselves in an electronic environment, period. Much like the banks and you name it. I mean, everybody's doing the same thing. Even your dentist or your doctors, and now you see them on the screens. Everybody's going toward that electronics process. I'm going to touch on, and and salt and pepper this discussion with references to Beyond the Border as well. Beyond the Border is an initiative between Obama and Harper. You remember that? You've probably seen it in the press. And they're talking about, the North American fortress and we're easing the movement across the northern border, but tightening it up anything from offshore. So as a result, they're talking about infrastructure changes, putting money at the border at first point of arrival to examine freight, all of these types of things, data elements that are going to be similar, not exactly the same, but similar for both countries, and many other initiatives within that Beyond the Border piece that's there. So as a result, customs is, and I use the word customs, it's CBSA for technical terms, but I'm an old guard guy. Okay, I used to be a customs guy, so I'm using the word customs. If I use CBSA or customs, it's the same thing. Okay, so customs is sitting there, and they say, we're going to be in an environment with no paper. No paper to us. We will not stamp, we will not sort, we will not deliver paper anymore, like they're doing today in some cases. Now, they've been reducing, even in my day, reducing the number of pieces of paper that they have to deal with. However, at the end state, it will be a paperless process between the industry and customs. Where's the paper? In your back door. Any broker's office, any freight forwarder's office you go to, any importer's office, they're on top of filing cabinets, in the corners, in boxes. The paper is not, anybody believe paper is going to disappear? Good, because it won't disappear. Okay. In fact, I'm going to give you a statement here. It's very important, and I started 7 years ago talking about this stuff, and I said that the movement of data and the movement of documents is as important as the movement of goods themselves. Okay, think about that for a second. I've changed that in the last 2 years, and as I said, the movement of data and the movement of documents is more important than the movement of the goods themselves. Because if you haven't got the data in the right place at the right time, and if you haven't got the documentation in the right place, it ain't going nowhere. It's not getting on a ship. It won't get on a plane. It won't get on a train. It won't get, because as the positioning moves forward, customs is saying, I want this information prior to its arrival. So we are challenged, certainly here at Thompson Ahern, challenged to get that paper quicker, especially in the air mode. Okay, that'll be a challenge. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. But that's going to be the environment that we're living in. It'll be a paperless transaction between customs and the industry. And customs is going to use those resources because they're going to be saving some resources, they don't have to handle paper, to do examinations, to do a better job out at the first point of arrival. Okay, so your first note here to take is that there are 3 things to remember. 1 is health, 2 is safety, 3 is security. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, health, safety, and security is the buzzwords for examination. And those 3 will be done at the first point of arrival. Be it Halifax, Windsor, wherever. They will not allow freight to move inland that is of one of those categories. Now, we've asked customs, can we get some definitions related or around that? Well, they were reluctant to give us that information because it's within their purview of what that is in definition. So really, health is very straightforward. You got lettuce with mold on it, right? You have to stop it at the border. You can't get it going in further and putting it on the shelf and taking a chance. Safety, well, you got child seats, you've got whether a toy has got paint on, lead paint on it, and items such as that. And security, well, the old bomb in the box, right? Or whatever the scenario might be for contraband, drugs, or things like that. But you're going to see, and I'm going to use that phrase several times during today, the health, safety, and security will be done at the first point of arrival. Okay? And customs will be positioning themselves, like I said, in beyond the border scenarios, they're building and moving toward facility changes at those major sectors that are coming into the country, and putting people and technology there to be able to do those health, safety, and security examinations. Okay? So clearly, we have to position ourselves as an industry toward that goal. Can I get the next slide? Investing in the future. It's going to cost you money. Any clearer than that? Okay. It's going to cost me money. It's going to cost everybody something. To go to a store and pick up this glass and buy it, there'll be a penny, half a penny, 2 pennies, 6 pennies related to security. Somebody did something for charging to get across the border, unless it's, of course, Canadian made. So modernizing the customs trade, they're spending a lot of money. U.S. spent about $3 billion and continues on security issues, all of these electronic processes that are in place, everything that's going on at the border, vacuum machines and X-ray machines, all of that stuff. It's a lot of money. Drones, all sorts of security things. And Canada follows. They're about $500 to $700 million and approaching, and it'll be more as we move forward. So they're making that investment, and they're expecting us to make that same investment. Okay? Because security isn't cheap, and it's not free. Okay? Sorry, did you have a question? Oh, okay. So that's where we're headed, and customs is spending that money, and U.S. is spending that money, and the North American piece is going to be a very important partnership between the two countries to make sure that, yes, that trade flows between Canada and the United States as quick as possible and as easy as possible, while the North American side getting from offshore is going to be looked at in a different way. Okay, so investment in modernizing the business process. Next one. So let's talk about the so-called new normal. Has anybody been to our presentations before, by any chance? No? You have? Okay. Oh, that's not mine, is it? How could I have done that? Let me just turn that off. After all that warning about you guys. Signals off. Technology is a beautiful thing. Alrighty, taken care of. So, when I'm done here, I believe you'll be able to take 2 or 3 of these slides and go back to your company and say, oh, here's what's going on. Are we prepared for this? And what do we need to do to make sure this thing is working? So these bubbles represent the business side of it. Number 1, we joked about Joe from Arkansas. Okay. More and more and more drivers, commercial drivers, have these identity cards. Okay, I happen to have a Nexus card here, but they're all about the same, give or take. They got pictures on there, and they've been vetted by customs in both countries. And they are basically demonstrating to the customs inspector, hi there, customs inspector, you know who I am. Do we have to talk? Probably not. We don't have to have that conversation at the border. Why? Because he knows that I've been vetted through the system, because I'm a good card-carrying member of the Customs Good Guy Society. Okay? So they know that. If I haven't got one of these, I couldn't get one of these, well, maybe I had a few indiscretions in my youth. Okay, so here I am, 18, had an indiscretion, and I'm still paying for that 35 years later, from that standpoint. Or I have something in my background, drunk driving charge or whatever the case might be, and they can't get it. So they're going to go east-west rather than north-south. Okay? So the vast majority now of driving in 2015, 2016 are showing up at the border and greeting that customs inspector with that card. That's who I am. And they know it's valid for 5 years, and they have to expires, and they have to renew. So they get to know this person. So, somebody says, what does that take? 20 seconds, 25 seconds between him and I. But take that and multiply that by 6,500 trucks that cross Windsor every day. Okay, just doing the math. And you can see how long and what that takes. So by the time end state rolls along, and I'm looking at that customs card, if I don't have this card and I show up, he's going to look up and say, oh, he's got about 5 trucks back there. Go inside. And whose freight is he carrying? Yeah, exactly. Okay, your freight. And so it's in your best interest as importers to make sure that the carriers you're using or the suppliers that are using the carriers to come into Canada, do they have registered drivers? Are they approved? Do they know about eManifest? Are they aware that Canada has changed the rules and the regulation? Because you don't want to find that out when they get to Buffalo. You want to know that they're doing the right thing prior to that happening. So these cards, these registration cards, I'm not saying that this is going to be mandated by law, but they, on a stroke of a pen, they said passports are necessary, right, to get across the border. So by the time by 15, 16, more and more drivers get these cards. They'll be the drivers that don't will stick out like a sore thumb. They'll show up and, hi there, I'm Joe from Arkansas. Right? And so I'm not criticizing Joe, but Joe only comes up here once a year. He didn't know. So he has to determine, this customer has to determine my admissibility. And to determine that admissibility takes longer now because of the security concerns. And as a result, can you go inside? Go see immigration? And then he's got to get out of his truck, park the truck, walk inside, go to immigration. And I do that on purpose because it takes time. And that's an hour lost, maybe an hour and a half lost. Who knows what the lineup inside is? And it doesn't matter what side of the border you're on, it's the same thing. There's a lineup of people to get on there, especially now with the sequestration in the United States, with furloughs happening and people can't work overtime in the United States. But in Canada, it's the same type of thing. You're going to get into immigration, and somebody's got to deal with you, sit down and wait for you. And where's your freight? On the truck in the compound. So you need to take an active approach in knowing where your business is going. Because, as I said, when you get into electronics, there is no gray area anymore. In the old days, I used to be able to, Rod used to come up to me when I was a customs inspector and say, listen, Oryst, I got a problem with the shipment, and I got the paper coming in tomorrow, and so we'd release the shipment. And tomorrow morning, he'd have a piece of paper on my desk that I required because it was a level of trust. In electronics, you can't do that. There's no gray area. There's no kind of a trust area, really, from that standpoint. It's either right or it's wrong. So if I show up with him again and he wants something into the system, he goes, it's not in the system. So that doesn't leave him much wiggle room. He says, I go inside, or worse, turn around, or worse, I penalty for not arriving with the right information. Okay? So we'll be talking about some of these things as we go through the day. So the commercial driver registration program, more and more, in fact, carriers today are paying their drivers to do this. $50, I think, $50 or something like that, right? $50. So $50 to do that, and it's good for 5 years to be able to do these types of checks and balances. And actually, it's become a condition of employment. It's with some carriers going across the border. So you can see this by end state. Everybody who's most, except for poor old Joe from Arkansas, may not have one of these things. Okay, so the commercial driver registration program. Yes.
And the carriers will charge you for a border delay.
That's right. I've seen special service charges or what do they call those? Surcharges on border delays, time delays, or whatever. Border security fees. I've seen all that. I've seen them all. So when I say it's going to cost you more, yep, it does. Because they have to do. Oh, no, that's exactly. You don't know.
No.
You don't know on something like that. So, often if you have a delay and you know about the delay, and you think, what, my shipment's sitting there for an hour and a half or 2 hours at the border, and you can ask the customs, you can phone up and say, and the customs says, it's not your shipment. So deductive processes there knows it's something different. I've seen it happen where driver shows up and they have to take him off the load. Somebody else has got to come down, pick up the load, and take it to Toronto. Okay, because that person is not admissible into Canada. So that's not unheard of. It happens with great regularity on something like that. Maybe some of you had that happen to you on that. Commercial driver registration program. So that's kind of the first part of the puzzle. You want to make sure your carrier knows what they're doing, and you may have got a great deal through a load broker. Somebody said, I can get you this load for $800. right, to Canada. And that $800 could probably cost you twice or three times as much by the time the delays kick in or penalties kick in the future by 2015, 2016. Because you got a good deal because the guy didn't know what he had to do when he came to Canada. Okay, so very important that you're talking to your shippers, you're talking to your carrier community, whoever you've got contracted with you, if you have that type of scenario, and that these people are using the right, not the cheap transportation, but the transportation that's going to be compliant. Questions? I'll pause there just for a second. Okay, everybody understand the driver registration program and where we're going with that? Okay. Part 2, or the bubble here. Advanced commercial information. Advanced commercial information. Customs wants information prior to the arrival. You're going to see the rules and the regulations. He's going to put up charts with time frames and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to deal with here that this has to happen. How? By regulation, by law. Okay? So they're created rules and the regulations that you as an importer, you as a carrier, as a customs broker on behalf of the importer, you now must provide electronic release information. And they're encouraging more and more of that electronic release information. So they don't want to deal with somebody walking in with a piece of paper because somebody has to key it in, somebody's got to get into the system. And at the stage of there's not going to be a data operator somewhere to be able to key this in. So the broker has to do this on your behalf, or that information is submitted from your back-end systems or whatever process that you might have. And if I have a 300-line invoice, that's all the lines, commodity lines, have to be classified for release purposes. It used to be you could take the top 5, and then you could take the top 10, and then they went to, now it's, I think it was January, January, it went all lines. So every line of an invoice. So, and I've seen some that, and who's an expert here? How long does it take to 300-line entry? An hour? No. You know, it can take 4 or 5. I've seen 6, 7 hours. I've seen entries take 2 days to key in when they get multiple parts and things like that. So if you're in a scenario of that, you want to make sure that you are working with your customs broker from an integration perspective. Let's get back to the supplier. Let's talk to them about the ability to take the data from the back-end systems into their back-end systems as a broker. Okay? If you're not doing that already, you're seeing that happen every single day. I have a slide related to that in a couple of minutes. Integrating the information. If somebody drops a computer printout on my desk and says, okay, I got to classify these, we got trouble. It's going to take time. And the industry, the carrier, doesn't know any different. He's expecting that you're going to deal with this fairly quickly, and you'll turn around this and make it a pre-arrival process package. And they now understand, as we've been going across the country, that this is big. If I have a 300-line entry or a 3,000-line entry, I have to do a lot of work. Brokers are publishing in the United States their time frames. This will take 2 hours, this will take 4 hours, whatever the case might be. Canada will do something similar related to that, so people understand that, hey, I can't turn this thing around in an hour. I can't do it. I can do it with some mitigating circumstances, which is the integration of the data from the supplier into my back-end system. Like here, Thompson Ahern has a system with Descartes as an example that they'll build the catcher's mitt for this data. So that if we go back to your supplier and say, can you give me that electronically? And the answer is usually, yeah, I can do that. I mean, it can be a spreadsheet, as little as a spreadsheet. But it can be, directly from the back-end system. I'm 95% operational and 5% very dangerous technology. Okay, so to me, the way I see it is if I go to a computer and I hit the print button, I'm telling the computer, please print this data this way. I should be able to hit that print button and send and map that data in such a way that I can send that data. Okay, and technologically, that's what I want. And as I say that, my technology guys say, oh yeah, I can do that because that's what they call integration. I map the data from the shipper to the system that the broker is using. And that data automatically goes in, and now I have all of that information in the system, and I have to either have SKUs or HS classifications and things like that I can put to it. It makes it that much simpler. So that's some of the things that you'll see brokers approaching you, and especially here, to try to get electronic data. People say, well, I can't get that. The company won't do it overseas. Have you asked? Have you talked to them? Maybe as simple as a spreadsheet rather than a piece of paper or a computer printout. There's ways of doing that. And that, if they know they can help you, often they'll make the change, especially if you've got somebody to help you do it. Okay? So it's very important when you look at from that perspective as an importer. So I'm talking as an importer that you can help your broker do the job better, quicker, to get that information into the system. So the brokers are setting themselves up. Certainly I know here at Thompson Ahern that business process is already in play, that they're getting data electronically, how to set up. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There is no downtime here. Messaging will be flying back and forth between customs and brokers and carriers. And, I go home Friday at 8. I don't come back till Monday. And by the time you get back on Monday, there'll be reject messages in there, status messages in there, all sorts of different things in there. And if you have left it for 3 days and you haven't done anything with it, it sits there until somebody looks at it. So, the systems are built with bells and whistles and email capability to tell people, hey, there's something in the system for you to look at 2 o'clock Saturday morning. And you're quite blurry-eyed Saturday morning at that time, and you don't want to look at it. Okay? But it's there because customs works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Their enforcement team is looking at these messages 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So when they're done, they send it out, and their expectation is that you'll be there or somebody will be there on that. And certainly if do you mind if I refer to Taco? I can Taco. Yeah. If Taco say, yeah, I need to speak to somebody about this. Who's the person to speak to about this particular shipment? So the broker, the importer, customs has issued notices to warehouses. We're not stamping documents released anymore. You must be on arrival capability. So in other words, you have to tell customs that freight has arrived at my building electronically. So customs is aware of it. You'll have to, as a warehouse operator, have to have release notification messages, RNS. So you're not going to have a piece of paper that you can put in your file and, okay, now you can deliver the freight. It's going to be electronic. So it's forcing the industry, and there are thousands of potential warehouse operators that may need this across the country in all modes of transport. Some have them, some don't. Some are still relying on the broker printing something out for them and walking it over with a piece of paper and saying, look, there's my release message. So they'll have to make that investment. So all these warehouses, who today are licensed warehouses, the changes have gone in, the customs notices have gone in to these people saying, hey, if you're going to renew or if you're going to register, you're going to have electronic capability to be able to do this business. And there's another, when I say another domino, the guy who sets up 3 million dominoes, hits the first one, expects them all to fall down. That's one of the dominoes that if it's not there, the shipment stops. Okay? So each player in this event is one of the dominoes. So if the broker doesn't do the right thing, the carrier doesn't do the right thing, if the warehouse doesn't do the right thing, the importer doesn't do the right thing, the shipment stops. And it can't move because it's not at the next status. It's in the electronic underworld. It needs a piece of data. So as we move forward, all of these pieces are coming into play. New advanced trade data requirements. 10 plus 2 in the States. Anybody heard of that? 10 plus 2? There's they had eManifest, ACI, and they liked it so much they went to the importer and say, we want data from you in the marine mode. And so there's a set of data elements. There's 10 data elements. You'll see those data elements a little bit later. So now, by law, you have to have a carrier declaration and by law, an importer declaration. And the two shall meet in the system. Okay, so import deck, carrier deck, and meet in the system. So as an importer, we're going to get into this I'll show you the data elements and other things. as an importer by 2015, and actually this is going to start 2014, the importer requirement for advanced trade data. So at minimum, you can do a regular pre-arrival processing, or at minimum, you have to give me a set of data elements for security purposes from a customs standpoint. So to even get a thing on the ship, I need those two declarations, importer declaration and a carrier declaration. And we'll get into that a little heavier later on. So all of the trade chain players, freight forwarders. How many use freight forwarders to move their freight? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, okay, several. Freight forwarders starting June, I think it's 9th or 6th, next week. 9th, June 9th, are now have to do electronic reporting to customs beginning in June. And they'll have this year implementation period. And so your freight forwarder is now, in the rules and the regulations, an entity. They are a person. So they have to comply with Section 12 of the Customs Act that you will report, and all whatever it says in the Customs Act on that, and you will keep records, and you will have truthful declarations and accurate declarations, and all, of course, the penalties surrounding that. For the first time, exactly. They were very heavily paper-based. So the freight forwarding community is the last group coming in on the electronic eManifest process. So that covers the main trade chain players from an advanced commercial information process. So all the trade chain players are now setting themselves up to deal with customs only electronically. And now customs 2014-15 sits back and just waits for data. It goes into the system, gets risked, and then to be examined or to be released at the first point of arrival. Okay? So electronic information from everybody, all modes of transport, highway, air, rail, all of them are sending electronic messages now. Only electronic messages. On the other side here is a custom self-assessment process. This is that kind of the gold card member of, who's heard of CSA? Custom self-assessment, just hand? Okay, good. Several of you. So what you're looking at here is, what you've done is you've kind of opened your guts to customs. I was on the original teams that put CSA together, and what it was is that we're sitting in a room, well, just like we're sitting here, okay, and we're got a whiteboard here like that, and people were saying, well, how do we do this special gold card? Because this was a time with Aeroplan and all of these you could be gold card members of all these different groups of things, and so we would say, well, we got to trust them. Trust. That's a foreign word. That's not the way you're trained in customs. You're looking at you're there to look at suspicious, something happening. So trusting was a kind of a different word for that. So how do we do that? Once we started talking about it, we said, okay, well, how do we know does the company know what it's doing? And so we created an application. And so the application basically said, here, show us how you do business. Because she does business different than you does. And you do, and you do. So while the application says, how do you do business? Now I know how you do business. You have a purchasing process, POs. You receive the freight, and you pay for the freight. You check it against what you ordered. You have that kind of a triangle, so to speak, right? Okay. And do you know what you're doing? Do you have a good OS&D? OS&D is overage, shortage, and damage reporting systems. Do you know what you're doing? If you have a bunch of overs, you should be making voluntary entries. Shortages, you should be making notes of that. Damages, same type of thing. Okay? So basically, you know how the customs business process works, and you do the right thing. And so customs looks at this application. It's about that thick. But you've basically said, here's what I'm importing. Here are my trade chain partners. Here's how I do business. And so customs audits this. Are you continually doing business this way? Yep, company knows what it's doing. And so there's about 100-ish, 15, 10, I think, I can't remember the number, that are on this type of a process. And there are a bunch of applications in the process as well that people are making adjustments to. At least that many. And the highway carrier is the same type of thing. they've become a CSA, custom self-assessment type of client, because they've opened their books to customs and said, look, this is the way I do business. I get an order, I get a bill of lading, I do my customs clearance, I deliver the goods to the client, I get a POD, proof of delivery, and I have my business triangle closed. Ordered it, cleared it, delivered it. I go back to my shop, and I show my dispatcher, here it is, and my system. I can go into any one of those companies and say, okay, shipment 47, 22, 48. And I'll pull it down, say, here's what happened. I picked it up on such and such a date. I cleared it here. Here's my RNS message. I delivered on such and such. Here's the POD. And so they show that they know what they're doing. And they have good OS&D scenarios. They know exactly what they're doing. And you'd be surprised how many companies don't know what they're doing. You know, I've walked into companies, and, you know, you go to the warehouse, and I go to the corner, there's a bunch of stuff there with dust on it, boxes. And I say, what's that? And they say, oh, that stuff was over. And what do you mean over? And they say, yeah, we got it over, it was delivered, it was over. And we have an auction every couple of years. Okay, so I'm glad you laugh, because it's important that you laugh on that one. It's when I have nobody laughing at that one, I go, oh, because they're supposed to. Yeah, I said, get that stuff manifested, get that stuff voluntary entries in, and get that into the system related to that. And so once they know what to do, that's fine. Oh, geez, I didn't know that. You know, Hank knew that, but he retired in '87. You know, and no, we didn't replace him because we didn't think we needed somebody. And you know the old story, right? On that. And usually, I find that in a lot of places, the customs person in the business is, well, customs, yeah, they're in the warehouse somewhere, or they've got that office in the corner somewhere that deal with customs. So a lot of times it's a secondary piece in the organization, or it's left on somebody's desk as a sidebar. So you see all sorts of different things that are happening out in the industry related to that. So you've got advanced commercial information, or you've got custom self-assessment. I'll walk through both of them a little bit later. So you got the gold card member who doesn't have to deal with this coming across the northern border. In fact, they're starting to talk about CSA type of clearance processes for offshore. It's on the table for discussion, and we've got a couple of programs. I should mention to you that I'm also on the IE Canada, which is Importers and Exporters Committee for Customs and Legislative Committee. I'm the co-chair of that, and I'm on the eManifest committee for a number of different associations. So we're kind of involved in getting these things rolling and getting them up and running, and suggesting approaches. So what we get is, from the membership, we get information, and we bring that to the table to customs to say, can we do this, can't we do it, things like that. So as a result, you've got these two approaches into customs. Either I show up as a good gold card member, or I'm doing all of this data that we talked about. And I'm going to be showing you, and James is going to be showing you, the data elements, and then we're going to walk through that process to see exactly what your customs broker is doing and what your carrier is doing to get your freight across the border. Okay? It's fairly significant. Of course, this is all underpinned with the fabulous administrative monetary penalty system. Has anybody not heard of AMPS? Okay? AMPS is now part of and parcel of the process. And it's not a punitive, it's corrective action, right? I can't sell that, can I? I just can't sell it. Of course it's punitive. They like to say that it's corrective, and it does correct your activities usually. Painfully, it does correct it. So, and the AMP side, there are several penalties that are involved in this. At the highest level, it's $5,000. Okay, so if you don't get your message in to customs, that's at the highest level of penalty, because they don't know what it is that's coming at them. There's been no security check. There's been no checks or balances related to that. So that could be $5,000. Okay, so if you make untruthful declarations or erroneous declarations and they catch it, it's a few $1,000s, $3,000. At least you made a declaration, but it was wrong. To have no declaration and arriving at the border, and he says, "This is grand. It's not in the system." That's what you're going to get. because you didn't make a declaration. It's not in the system. Turn around. Because I can't send you to the compound because there's probably another 20, 30 trucks in there. There's no room in there. I mean, even Windsor has only room for about 80 trucks. You know, at 6,500 trucks a day, that can be done by 7:30 in the morning. Okay? So as a result of that, the AMPS penalty process for all different levels, 5 different types of penalties that are there. I'm not going to get into all of them unless you think the explanation is enough here to say that if you don't do it, there'll be a penalty. And they range from hundreds of dollars to $5,000 and more if there's some fraud or anything else, and there's somebody's using your shipment as a vehicle or a conduit for drugs or anything else. So it's imperative that your broker and you work together to make sure that what we're talking about here today, when you leave here today, you should be going back and saying that this is what we need to be able to do. All right, so the administrative monetary penalty system is there. And of course, if we don't have a penalty system, then who's going to do it? Right? That's the only thing that keeps my wife from not driving fast on the highway. she likes to drive quickly. But she knows that there'll be a penalty to pay related to that. We make a trip from Ottawa to Toronto fairly regularly. There's always guys standing there with the with their radar. So the penalty is there to keep people honest and to keep people within the rules and the regulations. Oops. So, I believe that any one of you now can take that slide and talk to that slide. So, when you leave here today as an importer, there's 3 things that you need to do or you need to remember. Okay, so these are little jot notes for you. Number 1, when you leave here today, the C's in your company, the CEO, CFO, COOs, need to understand what you learned here today. Okay? That's the number 1 thing when you go back. If you have nothing else to tell them that I was at this thing and it says we have to do this, we have got to do a bunch of this stuff, and you want to be able to make sure that they hate surprises. Those C's in the company. Okay? So it's better they know now if they don't know already that that's going to be there. Number 2, it's going to cost them money. Even if you make a slide with a $sign on it, and that's the only slide you use, that usually gets their attention. Okay, because it's in the transportation side, just in general across the board, security is going to be a piece that there's a $sign attached to it. There's technological changes that are possible, which are always have a $sign attached to them. Right? As soon as you go to IT and you say, I need this, it's, well, I need 15 people and $500,000. Sorry about for those of you who are in technology, but it seems to be that way. And the last thing of the 3 is, are you the champion in your organization for this? Is it your responsibility? So why are you here today? If you're here today because you're the champion in your organization, great. If not, find the champion. Who's going to take this? This is a project. Okay? This is not, we'll give it over to Hank. Hank's in health and safety, and Hank will take care of it off the corner of his desk. Okay? This is a new business environment for crossing the border. So if you do a lot of border business, you need to understand this. And are you the champion? If you're the champion, you're going to bleed a little. You know, there'll be some scars after this. There'll be some delays, and people are going to say, why is this delayed? You know, and I certainly don't want to meet one of your CE company people, CEO, CFO, at a cocktail party, and they'll say, what is this eManifest stuff 6 months from now? You know, and why is their shipment delayed? Because they got a real good deal on transportation, but, you know, we're stuck in Buffalo. Okay? And that it happens so often because, quite frankly, in the carrier community, and you know, you're talking, I'm shipping something from Los Angeles, and I'm shipping it to Toronto. Toronto is an hour and a half away from Buffalo, maybe an hour from Buffalo, depending how fast you drive. But there's a vast difference in the two, getting it to Buffalo from California than getting it from California to Toronto. That little line in the sand, or the bridge, creates this stuff that we're talking about here. Okay, and the cost related to that. So somebody says, well, what's that surcharge for? Why am I getting charged for that? Well, now you understand. The carrier needs to do this. And when we get into the rules and the regulations, you're going to see that what the carrier and the broker has to do on that behalf. Pause. Okay, pretty well straightforward. Next slide. So what do we got here? What you have now is you've got a community, okay? You've got a community of these folks. That's not the entire trade chain, but it's a pretty good picture of it, okay? Who's involved in your business process, if you're from overseas or you're coming across from the United States. So what you have is this scenario. These folks here, every moment that I'm standing in front of you, somebody's connecting to somebody. Okay? It's like a commercial Facebook. Okay? You're getting that trade community talking to each other electronically. Okay? And it's whether it's an email or a download or a image of an invoice coming to you. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways of doing it. But nevertheless, these people in this new world of customs saying, I want just data, need to be able to talk to each other. So I have a carrier today who's moving their eManifest to customs, right? There's a set of data elements, and they have to do that in all modes of transport. So that data is moving to customs, and as it moves to customs, somebody's saying, hey, I want that data. Okay? So who in that circle wants that data? Well, the broker wants it. The importer, they may want it. The warehouse sure wants it to get it electronically. Any other government agency might want it. Certainly in the shipping side, the Stats wants their copy, and the port authorities want their copy. Somebody else wants a copy of a marine vessel. So here's this data flying around, and nobody wants to rekey it again. If I rekey it again, even a 0.5% error on 12.5 million shipments coming into Canada is a large number. And an error in keying could be an AMPS penalty on top of that. So if you can get data from source, if I can get the carrier data from their back-end system and put it into the system, customs will deliver that data. They're going to have a manifest forwarding piece built into their system so that the carrier can send it to TACO. So the carrier says, okay, I want to take my data electronically and deliver it to TACO as well. So they're delivering it to customs, and customs will take that and they will deliver it to the customs broker. We, as a service provider, Descartes, builds the catcher's mitt for TACO to capture that data. And that starts their release process. It saves them 20%, 30%, 40% keying. It all depends on the data elements and what they need to be able to do that. But it starts that process. And that's going to be built in. So service providers are providing the back-end system to be able to take the carrier data and put it, because the carrier is putting it into the broker's mailbox through customs or through a service provider, depending on the scenario you're using. So that the broker doesn't have to rekey. You take a cargo control number, right? And an 8 looks like a B. So you're going to get these mismatches in the system. So if you can get it directly into your system, you've keyed the right amount. In fact, it's even better because they want number of pieces at the lowest level to say, I want the number of pieces, 237, not one pallet or 8 pallets containing 237 pieces, because there's a mismatch. The broker puts in 237, and the carrier puts in 4 pallets. So now if you're getting that directly from you know exactly what the carrier is sending and what the broker is sending, and there's a match in the system. So as we go through this, the freight forwarder is going to start that now. They're going to put their manifest in the system. They're going to deliver that to here. And who else wants it? Carrier wants it. The customs broker wants it. Customs wants it. Warehouse operator wants it. So the data will be shared. Set of data. And the carrier, the person who starts the process of sharing, is the one who sends the mailboxes that it's going to. So if it's going to a broker, they're going to use the account security of the broker that may be involved. So if I'm the carrier, I'll know Taco's number and send it to Taco. If I'm a freight forwarder, I'll do the same thing. If I'm going to send it to the warehouse, there are 300 warehouses in Toronto. There'll be a locator code, a sub-locator code for each of the warehouses for where that freight will end up for clearance purposes or from holding purposes. So the warehouse is involved. So if I'm taking a purchase order from an importer, that purchase order goes to the exporter. The exporter fills out a customs invoice, sends it back to the importer, sends it back to the customs broker. And that's what I talk about when I talk about integration and getting that electronic data back and forth that much faster. Because we/customs want to move the information. Remember I said data and documents? Today, the carrier faxes the documents or images the documents to the customs broker. And the marine carriers won't do that. That's not their business to do that. They've never done that before. They're not prepared to do that. They're not staffed to do that. So here I am in Germany, Dusseldorf. And the guys there don't know anything about faxing, or they don't know anything about pre-arrival processing or PARS, so they're not faxing it. Lufthansa, we don't do that. We put it into a pouch, put it on the plane, and when the plane gets there, I deliver that to the customs broker. So now we have to be very inventive, we being Taco and you, how are we going to get that stuff from Germany into the hands of the customs broker as quick as possible to be able to get that information into the system. And we've got about a year to figure it out. Okay, that's not a long time. Not a long time. Okay? That's right. It's going to go fairly quick. Highway side, I'm not as worried. That's pretty well in there. But when you get into the air side and we get to the marine side, I am worried about that. And to the point where your freight will not get on the ship that was supposed to be leaving on Friday. And that next sailing will be 2 weeks from now, if the information is not in the system. So Taco will be talking to you, salespeople will be talking to you about how we're going to move that. There'll be strategic discussions just like we're having today to be able to get that information to the right people in your organization to try to make sure that freight continues to move. So as we move this around, there's all of these new, Customs says, okay, the goods are released. Who wants to know? Well, pretty well everybody. Right? The importer wants to know, carrier wants to know, broker wants to know, warehouse operator wants to know. So all this one set of status goes in and then delivered to multiples. Because there's no stamped documentation anymore. It's faster, but there's an investment of technology to all of those parties. Even here, banks. Customs is moving toward a new environment from the standpoint of accounting, where they're going and having separate account receivables with individual importers and their numbers, called CARM. Okay, so you'll see the next year or two, the floating date. I don't know if there's anybody here on the committees, but you are. So what's the dates?
214.
214?
214. Yeah, they've rolled back some of the initial requirements on they're going back to the standardized accounting that we're using today, so they've moved off the, what they had suggested with the LBS. And
Yeah.
They're staying with what we have.
Okay, good. Okay. So bottom line is that the Auditor General went in and checked Customs out and says, what do you mean you've just got one invoice and it's going to the broker and K84s and all that? They're saying, hey, wait a second, now you should be dealing with individual clients. They should have a record, how much they owe and all that kind of stuff. And so Customs is starting to move in that direction to say, you'll get your own little invoice saying, here's what your total is. You'll have an account in the system like you have with, like tax, right? Like your income tax. Yeah. And you'll be able to do electronic funds transfer. You'll be able to get your money to the customs quicker. See, that's another one that doesn't sell well, you know. No. Apps and no. I don't know. I try. I thought you'd be glad to hear that, to see that money flowing faster. Okay, so Peru's got this and had it for years. We haven't got it yet in Canada, from the standpoint of being able to do that for duties and taxes on that. So that'll be there, and I think that's part and parcel of the first wave, is it not? The electronic one. Yes. Yeah. First part of it. Okay, so you can, again, this is another slide that you can take back with you to whoever you need to talk to say, hey, these people, and use Facebook as a good example, because that's what they're doing. They're connecting. They're connecting. Instead of pictures of themselves having drinking parties, you've got pictures of invoices and bills of lading and other things that might be in there related to that. Okay, so service providers provide part and parcel of that, and customs provides the data. The thing with customs is they didn't want to be in this business of moving information, of data, because their lawyers are concerned, you know, who's sharing it, where does it go, if it goes to the wrong place. So they're going to send it once. If it's gone to the wrong broker, sorry, the industry will take care of itself. They'll get it to the right broker and things like that. They didn't want to get into this back and forth. And no, that's the wrong broker. I got to send it to the other broker and so on and so on. They said, you give it to me. You tell me what broker you want to send it to. I'll send it to that. But that's it. I'm not going to get into a scenario where we're going to send back rejects, and that's a control mechanism. And quite frankly, mitigating circumstances might even have an effect on a penalty because they sent it to the wrong place or whatever. They don't want to get involved. And they all are licensed warehouses. And on the renewal of their license or their registration, they must demonstrate that they have arrival and RNS capabilities.
Somewhere down the road,
within and state.
we're going to get to the point where we can clear everything wheels up in there.
And I'll correct you on wheels up, okay? And I'll give you that scenario now, okay? PARS. Everything will be PARS, okay? Everything will be PARS or ATD, okay? So if you got ATD, that's the minimal data that you can send, or send me a full PARS, right? And all modes of transport will have air PARS, marine PARS, rail PARS, highway PARS. So, with that scenario said, all the warehouses that are licensed with customs today must have RNS and arrival capability if they're going to renew their license. Number two, I'm on a committee that is looking at the entire cargo and warehouse modernization process. In other words, no more sufferance warehouses, so to speak. There'll be registered warehouses. Okay? There'll be no license fees related to that. And it will open up the capability of registered warehouses to every carrier. So when I'm a carrier, I can bring it to my warehouse, hold it in my warehouse. Okay? Now, everybody listen to this. In this scenario, I'm XYZ carrier who has a warehouse in Toronto, and where I'm used to take it to the sufferance warehouse. Okay? I can keep it in my warehouse under my registered warehouse because I have RNS and I have arrival capability. Give me a nod. So far, so good? So now I've got that. In the system, I have them registered as a sub-location code within Toronto. When the release goes in for that shipment, it comes to that warehouse. And they have an RNS message, and they can release it from their warehouse. If that has to be examined, it will go to a new IEF, Integrated Examination Facility. Correct.
And
Customs?
It's actually already underway.
Yeah, it's already underway.
All the warehouse fees
Yeah.
for April 1 of this year have already been refunded.
Yep.
And we're going from 14 different warehouses to one, which Oryst just described.
This came out in a customs notice. We've been on the committee for the last year on this. So your question is well timed. And they will have an IEF, similar to U.S., which has a CEF. From the U.S., right? Two of you? Oh, you. So you got an IEF, Integrated Examination Facility. At that facility, there'll be customs people. There'll be whatever they need to do their job. And you can send, I'm going to walk it through. You can take that, put it in a cab. Send it there. They'll receive it. In the system, they will update that to take the liability off of the carrier and take liability within the center, IEF. You can release from the IEF, or you can bring it back to your location and release it from there. They will provide a control number, so whoever picks it up says it's control number 157444331, and I can pick up this freight because it's released. So the importer can pick up his own freight, or put it in a cab, send it in a cab, doesn't really matter. Because it's in bond, under my bond as a carrier, until it gets to the IEF, at which time the IEF accepts it and removes my liability. That is what's on the table as we speak. Okay? There's customs notices to that effect on the CBSA website, outlining, not to the level I just outlined for you, because that's just the discussions on the table. Okay? But that's there now. CWs are don't need. Today I'm looking at it. I don't need a CW. I need a registered warehouse. That's all. To where I'm going to bring the goods and declare them as arrived. I have to be bonded still, but a CW with a licensed fee attached is no longer necessary under this new environment and under the customs notice that just came out. In fact, that's not even 3 weeks old, I think. Yes, you need stuff, but it stops them from having to take it and move it to the sufferance warehouse and stuff like that. And really, when you get to health, safety, and security, all that's going to be done at the border anyway. So what else is left? You know, whether the shirt is marked right. Commercial examinations. So they should be far fewer examinations inland, because the vast majority, health, safety, and security, will be done at the border, frontier. There has been discussions, and it's on the table, is what's a registered warehouse? And importers were saying, I want a registered warehouse. I want the carrier to bring it to my door, and I'm the registered warehouse with a sublocator code. And I have an RNS message and arrival capability. That's pretty good. Right? So when you look at this cost savings related to that, with a carrier, Joe from Arkansas, as an example, could be. He has nowhere else to go. So the IEF, we also had talked to customs about, the IEF has to support a Joe from Arkansas because Joe has nowhere to go. Well, Joe or anybody else could go to another carrier's location as well and use that carrier. If that, okay, yes, absolutely, yeah. Part of the advanced commercial information.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a specific sublock code, and the system
Yeah.
will not accept the information and will reject it if it isn't identified in that way. And that's why, as Oryst says, by its state,
It's okay.
all that information has been submitted and approved prior to. So we know exactly where it's headed. And that is all that matters. And that warehouse is not only registered and identified by a sublock code, but has full electronic capability for reporting and then can be released.
Arrival and RNS.
Yeah.
That's quite a departure. Quite a departure. So there's a lot of freight forwarders today going, well, if I don't need my CW, I don't need a CW. There's a whole question. Even Ruth Snowden, who's the executive vice president of CIFA, basically is talking to the import. And in fact, on June the 5th, I'll be doing something similar like this to the freight forwarding. It's an all-day workshop for them, to the point where, hey, if you're signing a lease and long term, you should be thinking about, do I need a CW? What do I need? What is it exactly that I need? And so you'll be seeing more of this coming out. Yeah. So it'll be 395 would be Montreal, and then the sublocators within 395. So you're beginning with 395, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on how many you have. I think we've got 300 in Toronto.
Yeah.
That's on the table. It's coming along, yeah. Well, the question was, why can't I have one? And the answer was, there's no reason why you can't have one. If you're bonded, you create a bond and everything. You're a registered bond warehouse, and you have RNS, all the right things in place. bring the goods to my warehouse, put it, you have a corner or a spot or whatever within your warehouse that you're going to keep these goods. That was some of the discussion. So you'll be seeing more, but I'm letting you know because I'm on the committee and we're talking about it, and I'm not saying that's there tomorrow, but it's on the table. Carriers for sure. There'll be an interim process, probably until such time as the whole registration process gets in and everything else, that you might be using a couple of warehouses in Toronto to start off as an IEF. Could be a sufferance warehouse is there today. That might be the IEF until Customs goes out to the industry and says, who wants to build an IEF? We'll come. We'll be there. And not only is it for examinations, but because that's all Customs cares about, but the IEF guy's going to say, hey, I need more business than just examinations. I don't know how many examinations you're going to do. I'm not going to get into the business. If I can attract other carriers to my location, then it might be a different story. So we're still in the working stages of that. Okay?
That also ties into BYD,
Yeah, beyond the border stuff. Yeah, all that. Yeah, beyond the border stuff. Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of changes going on. So all of that community, all of these changes going on for end state. Okay, so you got a different environment. And as I walk through this later on, we'll have a better picture of where the problems might be. Okay? The devil is always in the detail. And every one of these areas that I talked about, guess what? Amps, ampable. Okay, so if a carrier is bonded, if a freight forwarder is bonded, that's what they are. They're bonded, and so they're covered. The Customs feels they're covered for those types of movements. And until such time as they're absolved of that shipment being somewhere else, then they're on the hook for it. Okay? All right, how's it work? I like the spotlight. By law, the importer will make a declaration to Customs, true, correct, and timely. By law, the carrier will make a declaration under Section 12 upon arrival. True and correct declaration. Two pieces. This has been submitted. This has been accepted. This has been submitted. This has been accepted. The two are matched in the Customs system. New word, matched. You're going to be hearing in your office, has that shipment been matched? Has shipment 2426 been matched? No, it's not been matched. It's by itself? How come it's not been matched? You'll get an unmatched report versus a matched report. Okay? Okay? And so an unmatched report, you're going to say, oh, geez, there's an 8, and that was a B. You're going to find the matches. Somebody's got to make a correction. Okay? This is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock at night. Okay? So how come they're not matched? If they're not matched, Customs can't do their risking in the system. So there'll be a new buzzword around the office. Geez, we put that shipment in yesterday. Is it matched yet? And somebody's hunting around going into the system looking for its match, its mate. The carrier, you'll see the data elements shortly. The carrier submits shipment level detail. Where's it coming from? Where's it going to? Number of pieces, weight, description, and a set you'll see very shortly. Shipment level detail. Oh, by the way, this shipment is on this piece of equipment. It's a 40-footer. It is a flatbed. It is a reefer. It is a whatever it is. It is a van. So you're telling Customs that shipment is on this van. Excuse me. Not yet, but very shortly, the driver information, the crew information will be there. Now, Customs is capturing crew information on ships, on trains, on planes, and they will be capturing it on the highway mode. It is in the set of data elements that was handed out to the highway carriers, except they can't do something with it because of the privacy commissioner who's saying, what are you doing with this data? She's a lovely lady. But who are you sharing this information with? Who else is seeing this? How's it stored? What kind of information? So they're asking a bunch of questions about that. Now, U.S. already does that in the United States, the crew. Canada is holding off. They've built it in the system. We asked them, please build it in, and we know it's going to be there. They just dump the data. In fact, they've asked us, don't send it because it's difficult for them to dump. That shipment on that piece of equipment carried by that crew and is being pulled by this conveyance. Tractor number 84744, license number 2468. And it is a unique trip coming to Canada, a trip number that doesn't duplicate 3 years plus the current. So this identifies that shipment of this water on that day is arriving in Canada under those data elements. Okay? So the shipment is connected to the container is connected to the crew is connected to the trip. Got it? All that's connected. So at the end state, I've got that coming in by electronic mechanism from the back-end system of the carrier, or it's coming in through a portal. Customs has developed a portal. I think you have copies of some of the slides. A portal, and that portal is a web-based portal. You will have access to it. You'll have an access user ID, blah, 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 and you'll be able to go on as a highway carrier or their agent to do that on their behalf, key the information in, hit the button, and send. And you'll see those data elements. I'll refer back to this when we see the data elements. So you can't say, I can't do this. They built a portal. So either you're going through a third-party service provider like a Descartes, or of a number that are listed in the customs memorandums, or you're going through a portal to key it in. So you can't say, I can't do this. I haven't got automation. In fact, I'll tell you a little story. I was with Descartes at the time. A person said, I can't do this. We can't do this. We can't do eManifest going into the United States. Well, I said, what do you mean you can't do it? Well, we don't have any fax machines to do PAPs. And I said, well, that's okay. We can handle that. I said, well, we don't have computers. Okay, that's fine. That's what a service provider does. We can do that. But okay, we don't have electricity. Come on. It is a religious group who makes furniture. Shipped to the United States twice a week. Okay? And they don't have any of those things. So they have to get somebody to rent a truck, take the furniture, and make the declaration go down. So there was a process we developed with another company that they go in. It's a service center in London. And they go in, they drive into the service center, they have their eManifest keyed into the United States, hit the button, and submit it. So you can't say, I can't. Okay, certainly didn't think of those people. But they still have to comply with the rules and the regulations. Okay, so you send the carrier data in through a portal or through electronic processing, it's a back-end system. The information goes in, an accepted message comes back. That's basically your first go message. Okay, data's in, customs accepted. It doesn't mean they love the data or they, from an enforcement standpoint, everything's okay. It just says all the fields are filled in and it's accepted. Syntax errors, no syntax errors for those of you who are technology savvy. It's in the system, unmatched. Accepted. They have a record of that shipment coming to Canada. On the other side, I have PARs going in, all modes, or I have advanced trade data, ATD. or what I call a mini PARS. I'll get to that later on too. Because you got the full PARS data, or you have a less than full PARS data, like the 10+2 in the United States. At minimum, you have a carrier declaration. You'll see those data elements after coffee. That information is generally submitted by the customs broker. That's going into the system. It's accepted. It's in the system accepted by the cargo control number that was issued here at the shipment level detail. The two shall match in the customs system. When they are matched, customs now has both declarations. It goes into their risking system. The risking system, Titan. Titan. I love that name. It just gives you that monster in there. Okay? This data goes through all of the secret society stuff. And in the system, it says to be released or to be examined. And are waiting the arrival of the freight at the frontier port. It goes through the health, safety, and security checks and balances. And is now in the system, ready for e-release. So, get back to your comment. Arrival. Air mode. Was wheels up. Now, as I'm standing here in front of you, because this is, of course, all subject to change, is when NAVCAN says you can land. There's a message. Tells Air Canada, United Airlines, American, Lufthansa, you are cleared to land. We negotiated that back from wheels blocked in the committee meetings. So where it was wheels up, you could send the arrival messages, it is now when NAVCAN says you can land. That allows the UPSs and the others to at least start the business of sending the data of arrival so that they start unloading the plane. They can now move the parcels, released, not released, not released, released, that much quicker. Wheels block was a bit tight. Certainly wheels up was the best, but that's changing. Marine, the berthing of the vessel. Generally speaking, if I'm out sitting out there, it used to be 12:01 of the date of expected arrival. If the harbor master, or whatever you want to call him, says, go to Pier 35, the crew is ready to tie you down, tie you up. The berthing of the vessel, they can start sending arrival messages. Highway, how you doing? It's my arrival. Okay, I give a barcode. Trains, well, as they are today, they come across the border, they advise, and there's barcode readers and car readers, and you name it. Electronic. Now, of course, all of that can be subject to change, but that's the current scenarios that we're dealing with. 12:01 was not good because sometimes that thing would sit out in the harbor for 2 days. Or may not even arrive because of weather. So that's in the system. Ready for those 4 arrivals. Air PARS, marine PARS, rail PARS, highway PARS. All warehouses electronically connected. No stamping of documents. Let's take a break. Sure. I saw the coffee guy. He was here. Okay, let's do coffee, and then we'll start with the rules and the regulations. Now, we interject a lot during this particular time frame, so we'll be talking about a lot of these items, and I'll put an operational spin on the rules and the regulations as we go through that. Okay, so what do you want, 15 minutes? 20 minutes after 10? We'll do a restart. Okay? Pace okay for you guys? Pace? Okay? Yes.
Looking at it as an irrigant for it.
Yep.
Now, normally, when you do forward and forward,
Yep.
you find the house bill.
Yep.
True deciding for
Yep.
true ship.
Yep.
And I notice a lot now that you get the ACI,
Mm-hmm.
the airline,
Mm-hmm.
they don't actually have true ship or the true
Mhm.
So they'll still call you.
Yep.
And they'll turn around and say, well, customs is looking for such and such.
Yeah, as a forwarder, you're going to have to move it to your 8000 series, to your freight forwarder bill now. It used to be on the air bill, and it used to be forwarder to forwarder. Now the freight forwarder is going to have to take it off of the air bill and create his own freight forwarder bill.
Really?
Yep.
So you're going to actually show the true ship.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, they're forcing him to do that. Yep. Did you have a question? No? Okay.
Are you going to bring Fred back to rewrite the rules?
Yeah,
Lance?
light. Fed light. Yeah,
God,
it's changing.
everybody.
I know.
For
I know.
3 years.
Yeah.
Where's Fred?
Oh, yeah. Fred and his goddamn amps penalties.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of changes, eh?
So we're still, as far as everybody knows, we're July of next year for importers
Yeah.
to start. Like you,
That's
you
what it looks
don't
like.
see that pushed back again.
I think they have enough experience now in building it that by the time we get to 14, they'll have it in place.
Okay.
And plus, it's the importer side is not that big.
No,
It's just
I
a
know.
subset of PARs already, and they're adding to PARs, by the way, the manufacturer. Eh? Yeah. So when
well,
it-
we do ISF in
Oh,
the
that's
States
right,
all
yeah,
the
yeah.
time.
So you're
we're
familiar with it.
fairly comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And we build it right into the PO
That's
right
right,
now. We
exactly.
say to the guys, if you don't follow
That's
this,
right.
we send the bill
That's
to you.
right, yeah.
That type of stuff.
That's right,
But-
exactly.
But, no, because I got my guys fired up about 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I said, come on, guys, we've got to do this. Got the prez on site, did a presentation, and then I couldn't get information out of anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what was happening with importers? So, but I'm hoping someone like you to hit semi-retirement early next year, and I'm trying to carve out a project that,
Yeah.
as you said,
And
a
that's what you
champion,
need. Yeah.
because
You need a
this-
champion. You got to have a
Gotta
champion.
have somebody
This
that's
is a project. This is a project.
Working with IT
Yes,
boys and
exactly.
all your suppliers and everybody.
Yeah, you're gonna once he does the rules and the regulations, you're gonna see like, holy shit, this is fucking big. You know, this is not something you work off the side of your desk as a sub project or something. This is like somebody's got to take this and run with it in the organization. And
I guess the first thing I need to do is I need to dispense with just a few formalities. And for that is to first and foremost to thank Rod Kyle and Thompson Ahern for entertaining us here today, to invite us here to this event, because this is a very large part of our outreach. And it's an example of the collaboration. Rod has served on many different committees, and he's been a part of the consultation process with our agency for many years. And this is just another example of that collaboration. And we work together to deliver this message. And to thank my colleague and my cohort, Oryst Dydynsky, for working with me. It's been a lot of fun. We've had a lot of fun, and I think we've done some very good work. As I said, we've done a lot when we can't remember how many times we've been coast to coast now, because that's how many times we have been. So that's the formality part of it. We'll try and get you the answers to all your questions. Like as Oryst likes to say, we're about 70 or 80%, 90, 95% there. But there's, and I guess the only other thing I would add to that is just remember that there's ongoing consultation still as we speak. So as much as many elements have been clearly articulated and identified, Rod is a part of subcommittees, Oryst is in his role as a consultant and a principal is very involved in ongoing consultation. So there are still some elements that have to be fine-tuned and refined, especially when we start talking about the way things are moving into the future with, beyond the border commitments and, arrive twice and examine once and all of these concepts. And those are some of the elements that are piloted right now, so that they are part of our reality, and they will become more of a reality as we move forward. So, of course, our agency doesn't charge for my role here today. It's part of, as Oryst likes to say, this is your tax dollars hard at work. Yeah, in a matter of speaking, yes. We can go ahead. So, 5 key points to remember. That this is a transformative process, and there's no doubt about the fact that the commercial element of our business is clearly the most complex. And we're trying to move this forward. If anybody in this room was around when we implemented Across, and Mr. Dydynsky back there lost a lot of sleep in those days because he was very heavily involved in that, it was a massive and a major undertaking. And what we're trying to do is move forward with automation and the provision of advanced commercial information, or ACI. This is, again, another whole transformative process. It's complex, it's difficult, because it's the interim that is challenging us, not the end state. The end state makes perfect sense. As you heard Oryst very articulately identify to you this morning, there's no question that by end state, things will work smoother. And I'm not so convinced there'll be so many AMPS penalties, but it's not so much about that as much as it is that, as Oryst said this morning, the information provision and where that information goes, how and when it's shared, is far more important than what happens to the freight. That front end part of the process is critical, because without that and the successful elements, as Oryst mentioned, that final match message, freight isn't moving. And if it's moving, it's going to get into they're going to get into, if a carrier insists on moving prior to that phase in the process, then the carrier will suffer the consequences for that. That's the other good thing about this. As we implement the various phases, the benefit is the liability and the responsibility is with each separate entity. Carriers will be responsible for their element. The importer will be. The broker will be. The warehouse operator will be. Whereas, historically, much of that has gone directly and been laid at the feet of the importer. Every party in the process now will have their own responsibilities. So that's the one nice thing. There's no brush painting everybody with the same sort of smear. There will be different options, obviously, for you to be able to make decisions and decide what suits your business practices most effectively. And part of that process is the engagement that you have with your host here today, Thompson Ahern, with your other trade chain partners that you regularly do business with. And I've heard here already this morning, we have no idea how it's being shipped. Well, your communication with your vendors is critical. And I did a webinar once, and it was for the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. So we got on, and there was like 250 callers in on this thing. It was a huge undertaking. I thought it was Canadian, very mistakenly. But then I was getting questions from people from Vancouver Island, Salinas, California, Florida, Alabama, North Carolina, Nova Scotia. I learned very quickly we had a pretty broad base of people, but I had a call. One of the questions was from a person in North Carolina. Said, "I'm a grower, packer, shipper," and we were, trying to get them informed about the carrier initiative. She said, "I'm a grower, packer, shipper. What has this got to do with me?" I said, "Well, first of all, some guy shows up at your farm with a truck. You load your commodity onto that truck. That truck has a commodity that is perishable, and in so being perishable, for our agency, determined to be higher risk. Because if we do have to engage that process and shipment in any way, we have to be very careful that what we're doing is responsible, because that is a perishable shipment." And I said, the other thing is, you're entrusting this shipment to a carrier that's going to bring it to market. How and when it gets to market determines on how much money you make on that shipment. So I said, the risk for you is who you're giving it to. And what we're asking you to do is be vigilant about who you do business with. You want to make sure that that carrier is able to meet the regulatory requirements for eManifest coming into Canada. And because Americans, the U.S. ACE system doesn't require empties to report, many carriers coming to Canada go back empty. They have no idea that there's an ACI process in place. Only since we've begun this outreach are they now becoming more aware. So I said to her, I would recommend that you want to ask those questions to that carrier before you just load all your produce onto that truck and send them off. Because I said, once it's gone, it's gone. Whether or not it's admissible, whether that carrier can meet the regulatory requirements, you have no idea. But you've now entrusted that $60,000 load to that carrier. You want to be vigilant about knowing who it is you do business with. So we're implementing eManifest over a period of time. Our American counterparts cautioned us and said, try not to draw the line in the sand like we did. Like they announced in March of 2008 that Highway ACE, or Highway Advanced Commercial Information, was mandatory May 1st. They give them less than a 6-week window when they made it mandatory, and that created havoc. So we've been trying to encourage early adoption where you can work out your glitches and whatever kinks there are in the system. You can work them out. There's no penalties. There's no issues associated to that. If the ACI, the Advanced Commercial Information, runs into a problem, as long as the PARS entry is valid, technically we could still release it. There's no penalties anyway. The bottom line is the Crown has assured their funds against the account security of a broker and the freight moves. That's really what matters in the interim. But we're approaching that mandatory implementation timeline where the provision of Advanced Commercial Information will be mandatory, and we hope that'll happen by this fall. And I've already talked about some of the advantages of starting early and being an early adopter. And our agency is committed to working with everyone throughout the process so that you can comply. We have carriers, highway carriers today, who have been transmitting ACI to our agency on cargo and conveyance for over 2.5 years. So this isn't just a flash in the pan. This isn't just going to go away. And what Oryst described to you this morning is not really complex. What it is it's the shift in your business, and it's the shift in the way you'll do business in the future. So we'll go ahead. So we'll talk a little bit about the eManifest basics, some of the benefits, data, transmission options. You heard this morning about Manifest Forward, secondary notified party. There's notifications available in the system now, much like RNS, more like a courier that can tell you what the status is of your shipment. We'll talk a little bit about the process, and then I end with the infamous question, are you ready? And I end with that question because Mr. Dydynsky already suggested to you the 3 elements that you need to remember when you leave here today, what you need to do. And that question goes with it. Are you ready? And if you're not, where are you? Okay, we'll go ahead. Yep, go ahead, Dibby. Thank you. So, eManifest automates the commercial process, even more so than it already has been, by adding advanced commercial information, or I'll use the acronym ACI. And ACI is the reporting part of what's required to move your freight through the process. It's the advanced commercial reporting coupled with the PARS, which is the release mechanism to move your freight. Who does it impact? Started off with highway carriers, rail carriers, freight forwarders, and eventually importers. And this is a part of the 3rd phase of advanced commercial information, because in 2004, we implemented advanced commercial information for marine carriers to report cargo and conveyance data, and then in 2006, air carriers to provide advanced ACI for cargo and conveyance. And then what's required? Cargo detail, conveyance detail, or the details on the equipment moving that freight, house bill information for freight forwarders, and importer advanced trade data, or ATD. And for the freight forwarders, this is a huge shift, because now everything that took place, not everything, but a large part of what took place post-arrival in end state will have to be completed, submitted, and accepted prior to loading. And Oryst and I have done a few of those sessions with the Freight Forwarders Association, and I'll remember that. I'll never forget that one gentleman here in Toronto who said, wait. He stopped Oryst at his explanation. He said, wait a minute. So, and then he did a little recap of what Oryst had just said. And then he said, wow. And it was like the light went on in his head. Okay, so now if we submit this information, because he's already familiar with marine freight, so he knows there's advanced commercial information, and he knows if there's an RFI or a request for information, someone has to comply with that. That foreign agent has to comply with that. If they don't, our targeters just issue a no-load order, and the freight misses the ship. So he said, well, because one of his questions to Oryst, well, what if it comes in like Saturday morning at 2 o'clock? Oryst said, well, somebody better be there, or somebody better be able to review that information and comply with it, because if they don't, your freight isn't going to even get loaded. So that whole idea that they not only, because they deconsolidate post-arrival, now all that has to be submitted. House bill detail, closed message for deconsolidation prior to loading at end state. So this is a huge shift for the freight forwarders. All right, we'll go ahead. I've already talked about when we implemented the various phases, and we're now in the process of the third phase of advanced commercial information, as I said, for highway carriers, rail carriers, freight forwarders, and ultimately importers. We'll go ahead. So for highway carriers, they've been able to transmit since 2010. The system was first available for carriers that were connected to our agency by EDI, and it was available October 30th, 2010. We received the first transmission on November 2nd. Some of those carriers had some glitches, and when I say carriers, I'm talking about national carriers, not owner-operators, national carriers. And they were able to work through their glitches, and now that's just the way they operate. Their cargo and conveyance information is submitted electronically in advance, and it's in an accepted status before they proceed. The regulations were to be enforced, be in place to mandate it or to make it mandatory fall of last year. That was pushed off to the spring because of some electronic issues. And now the agency is just about, we hope to see something next month, where the process is a quasi-political process whenever we implement, because we have to, for mandating it, we have to implement, we have to publish the penalties in the Canada Gazette. And with that publication comes the invitation to request submissions of concern or issues to be brought to the attention of the agency. Anything brought to the attention of the agency must be dealt with and responded to prior to those penalties becoming mandatory. Every submission made after that Canada Gazette publication must be dealt with. So we're hoping that by this fall, it will in fact be mandatory for highway carriers to submit cargo and conveyance information electronically in advance. The agency is committed to providing that confirmation a minimum of 45 days prior to the notification.
Okay.
Rail carriers went into production. They were supposed to be in production in 2012. There were some glitches and some problems. We thought that would be a no-brainer. 98% of our business with rail carriers is electronic. So we thought, well, how challenging can this be? Well, it proved to be more challenging than certainly our agency had anticipated. There were some major issues that they've since been able to deal with. It's still not perfect. There are still some glitches with the freight forwarding piece and back-to-back shipments. But by and large, the major rail carriers, of which there's 2 in this country, are able to transmit the cargo and conveyance information to us electronically. We anticipate in early June that freight forwarders can commence to transmit their data set. And there was just some confusion there that Oryst was involved in ironing out, because we were saying that it was available, and then freight forwarders were coming back and saying, no, it isn't available. How can you tell us that it is when it isn't? And what the confirmation and clarification that Oryst received was that the applications are available to transmit by EDI, and the anticipation is that very shortly thereafter the web portal aspect will be available. because for those freight forwarders that aren't connected to our agency by EDI, there must be a web portal. We did the very same thing with highway carriers. EDI carriers that were commenced transmission in 2010 were okay, but then for the rest of the carriers who aren't connected to the agency by EDI, we had to design, develop, and deliver a web portal, which we did. Went into production in August of 2011. And so now carriers who are not connected to the agency by EDI are able to transmit through a web portal. There's no charge for that web portal. It's free to get registered and set up. Having said that, there's no fee that we request as far as something in the way of what it might cost to administer that. Oryst talked about that already. It's going to cost money because you can't just design this portal and figure that you could just turn it on, create your transmission, submit it, shut it off. That's not the way it works. Someone has to monitor that account. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the freight forwarders we're anticipating will be available to commence transmission in early June of this year. And importers, the expectation is we'll be able to transmit advanced trade data in July of 2014. So this is the deployment timeline. As I mentioned already, in October 2010, EDI was available, a transmission was available for highway carriers. We launched the web portal in August 2011. In 2012, rail carriers commenced to try and transmit, and we've since dealt with their issues and worked them out with them. The functionality for freight forwarders is anticipated to be available in spring next month, commencement. And in the fall of 2013, we expect that the mandatory implementation or the mandating will be there for mandatory provision of ACI by highway carriers in the fall of this year. And in July 2014, we expect that the importers will be able to transmit advanced trade data. So the benefits. I'm going to go a little quickly through here because we could talk about it at great length, but I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the benefits. Are there benefits? Clearly there are. And I guess I would explain it to you in a very simple example. Everybody here is familiar with the courier process? The courier process, the order in council, I think you were involved in that too, weren't you, Oryst? Yes, you were, of course. You know the very scary thing is? I spent 27 years in this organization before I met Oryst, and he had already retired. I had heard about him for 25 or 26 of the 27, and I didn't meet him until 3 years ago. And we've worked a lot together since then. But the whole premise of advanced commercial information and the logistics of that really comes from what we see in the courier business. The courier business, there's an order in council that provides for an aircraft in Memphis to start loading 20,000 pouches, and that's one of 5 aircraft coming to Toronto today. And they start loading that aircraft at midnight or whenever. They have an electronic consist sheet. That electronic consist sheet has the shipper and consignee of all 20,000 of those pouches on that aircraft. We receive that often prior to departure or certainly at wheels up with that aircraft. We have that system available with all of that information available to us electronically in advance. What can we do with that? We set targets in that system. We can review that system. There are officers that go to work and scroll through those electronic consist sheets every day of every week because that's what's required in order to keep that system to move. How many transactions, Oryst, today? So right now, LVS is not a part of our Advanced Commercial Information Initiative. But I want you to understand that the concept is exactly that. We've taken that concept of the provision of advanced commercial information and just applied it to highway carriers, to rail carriers, to marine carriers, to air carriers, to freight forwarders. So some of the benefits include, for the trade community, having an understanding of what you can expect. Oryst described it to you very simply and very clearly this morning. You have advanced commercial reporting on cargo and conveyance from the carrier. The importer engages the broker creates the electronic entry. That goes in. So the carrier has submitted cargo, it's accepted. They attach a cargo control number to that. And once that's accepted, they create their conveyance report. They identify and articulate all the details on the equipment that's bringing that freight to Canada. They associate that cargo control number to that conveyance report, and they assign a conveyance reference number to that conveyance report, or a trip number. The broker has that cargo control number. They create the PARs, and that's how our system connects it, by the cargo control number in the system. So once the ACI for the carrier is submitted and accepted, cargo and conveyance, the broker's PARs submitted and recommended for release, the system matches it, that's when the carrier comes to the border. The process becomes very, very quick. And if I thought it wasn't working, Oryst and I were doing a session in Niagara Falls in September last year, and I said, we've already had reports back from the Ontario Trucking Association, the Canadian Trucking Alliance, that their carriers, their major carriers who are engaged in this process, are already experiencing quicker release times at the border. They've been in production, some of them, for 2.5 years. They've worked through all the kinks. It's working fine for them. And then the fellow put his hand up at the back of the room, remember? And he said, well, and I can't identify his company because I'm from the government. Oryst could tell you who he is. And he said, our trucks are all connected by satellite. We have RFID technology. And I can tell you here today that our process time is less than 3.7 minutes nationally. So I thought, okay, fabulous. Thank you very much. And the whole idea is really that it's so much of it is electronic now, and it's done beforehand, that the process at the border is pretty fluid. That officer's still there to do the eyeball to eyeball, because if the ACI and the PARS entry says it's 10 pallets of paper, and Buddy looks up from his desktop there in the primary booth, and he sees it's a tanker truck, well, there's something wrong, obviously. But that's just an extreme example. But essentially, that officer's role is to do the eyeball to eyeball. We want those officers to make as informed a decision as they can to make it move. As long as I've been in this business, I've been saying the same thing, regardless of what I did. If I was an inspector, a superintendent, a chief, a trainer, a director, it's always the same thing. You focus on the high risk and you let the low risk go. The high risk is a small percentage of our business. The low risk is the vast majority. So that concept still applies. Our officers are just trying to make as informed a decision as they can for release, and with the provision of advanced commercial information and the fact that we have that information in advance, we are able to validate it and risk assess it. That just means the freight will move even quicker. That really is the concept. Are we interested in increasing our examination facilities or examination rates? Absolutely not. We're not getting more officers. We're not getting more facilities. The talk of the building of the integrated examination facilities, the IEFs, is part of Beyond the Border. That'll be a shift in the way we do business. We're not getting more bodies to run those operations. That's certainly not the way it looks at this stage of the game. I don't know. That might change between now and then, because the intention is not to increase the number of exams, but to focus our limited resources on the highest risk and keep the low risk moving, because the vast majority of it is low risk. We'll go on to the next. And for the Canadian citizens, it allows us to identify what's highest risk so that we can meet our mandate as an agency, which is the health, safety, and security of Canadians. When they created this agency in 2003, that's exactly what their intention was. They took our agency, they took customs out of the revenue portfolio for the very first time in our history, and changed our mandate. It wasn't the collection of the revenue. That's coincidental to what we do. Our role is to protect the health, safety, and security of Canadians. So the data. All right. This is the time frames within which this data must be provided. Some of you have probably seen this before. This would go, as Oryst likes to say, this is another one of those pin-up slides that would go with his slides. And we have it broken out by 4 modes: marine, air, rail, and highway. And then we have the various client types. Carriers. So carriers must provide cargo and conveyance electronically in advance, minimum of 24 hours in marine, prior to loading or arrival, depending on the origin of the goods. The reason that definition is like that is because the time to sail from Cleveland to Hamilton isn't very long, and it's not 7 or 8 days at sea. In the air mode, 4 hours prior to arrival or at time of departure, or what we call wheels up. In rail, 2 hours prior to arrival, and in highway, 1 hour prior to arrival. Oryst gave you an example this morning about Buddy going to the consolidated warehouse in Buffalo and saying, and we got a real loud screaming message from these carriers. They're saying, what are you talking about? I can go from that bridge in Fort Erie to Buffalo to that warehouse. I'm 20 minutes from the bridge. You telling me I got to wait an hour now? And we're saying, yes, you do. Unfortunately, yes, you do. In order for us to effectively be able to risk assess and validate the data and risk assess it, we need that 1 hour time frame in there. So for freight forwarders, they'll be providing electronic house bill and supplementary cargo data under the same, and the various modes have the exact same time frames: 24 hours in marine, 4 hours in air, 2 hours in rail, 1 hour in highway. And then for the importers to provide electronic data, it'll be the very same: 24 hours prior to loading in the marine, 4 hours in air, 2 in rail, 1 in highway. And it's an adjustment for them, is what it is. It becomes an adjustment. But that time frame, actually, I'll add to that. You can submit, your carrier can submit their cargo and conveyance data up to 30 days in advance. And if you're wondering where this is all going, the PARS submissions that your broker puts in on behalf of the importer could be submitted up to 30 days prior to arrival. That was just changed. Now that PARS information can be submitted 90 days prior to arrival. And I understand that our systems will accept cargo and conveyance information from carriers and then freight forwarders up to 90 days in advance. And they want to align all of that so that all of that information can be submitted to our agency prior to loading in the marine mode. So you have to understand that with all of that, so we have the carrier provides us the cargo detail. She identifies the equipment, the conveyance detail. The broker has the PARS entry ready in lieu of ATD for the importer. The freight forwarder has all their deconsolidation, their house bills, and their SUPs are all in. And we have all of that information all linked in the system by the cargo control number. So we have the ability to validate it and risk assess it prior to loading. So now you understand, at the time of arrival, it's a pretty coincidental process for the vast majority, except in cases of health, safety, and security of Canadians. And then we have a mandate to do what we have to do. Now, having said that, even though we have all of that information in advance, there can be a recommendation for release, excuse me, and there are no issues prior to arrival. That officer's job at the time of arrival is to do the eyeball to eyeball. If what he or she sees doesn't jive with what they see on the screen before them, then they're obliged to override that and make a decision. That's what they're paid to do. The intention is we can make the border more effectively operate with advanced commercial information. And if you're wondering if that won't work, look at the courier business. The courier business wasn't as refined as it is today when it began. There were challenges, there's no question. But look at how quickly and how much freight can be moved in that process. Even the high-value shipments that the couriers are transporting, that process works very, very effectively. There's two belts, I always say. You know, the guy scans the barcode, it says release, drops it at the belt at the bottom of his feet that goes around the corner and out to the trucks. The other one that's going for referral goes on the belt in front of that. That goes down into the customs exam area, and often it makes the truck long before that truck leaves. The process works and works very effectively. All right, we'll go ahead. So, highway carrier data, 77YY, as you well know, for highway carriers was eliminated in 2011. And, just a quick story about going back to Oryst's example of this morning. I was doing this presentation out in Alberta, in Edmonton, and there was a large number of oil patch clients there. And when I started talking about elimination of 77YY, this guy throws up his hand and says, I can't believe that. I said, I stopped my presentation. I said, he said, this is the third time in 2 weeks I've had this issue. So I said, well, what's the issue? his company bought a $5 million piece of equipment from a company in Texas. This is oil patch stuff, Fort McMurray. So you make arrangements, and the vendor says, I've got a deal for you. I've got a carrier that'll bring it in 40% less than your transport costs today. He says, that's the ribbon on the deal. Perfect. So they set it all up. The order's placed. Carrier's on his way. Buddy hires the millwrights to go in. They do the tear out. This is a production facility, so this has to be just-in-time inventory. They have to do the tear down, get the equipment in, take the old one out, put the new one in, run the systems testing, and put it back into production. About 28 hours, 26 hours before it was scheduled to be there, he gets a phone call from a guy. He said, hi, I'm your carrier. I'm actually in Shelby, Montana. I got refused entry to Canada. The guy says, what are you talking about? What are you doing in Shelby, Montana? He said, well, when they turned me around at the border at Coots, I just drove back to Shelby. That's the closest truck stop. So if you want to send somebody down here, get your equipment, because I can't get into Canada. He wasn't a registered carrier with CBSA.
But they got a good deal.
Oh, they got a really good deal. I said to him at the end of that, I said, so what happened to your 40%? I said, well, first of all, how'd you get it? He said, well, I had to call one of my regular carriers, call in a favor. They had to pull equipment off another run, go down, get the thing. I said, and how close were you to your meet? He said, less than 2 hours. That's how tight the window got. I said, what about your 40% costs? He said, don't even go there. So it cost them a small fortune to have to do that. And it's just the reminder again that you need to be vigilant. And this is the communication you need to have with your vendors. Because I know so often you say, well, I have no control over that. They just arranged that. Well, maybe now that needs to be part of the conversation that you have with them. Just to protect yourself. Because Oryst very eloquently described it this morning. Buddy gets caught up in whatever, his truck gets caught up in whatever, and meanwhile, your freight's on that truck, so you get caught up in whatever. And you want to try and avoid that as best you can.
Does that ever happen?
Never.
I didn't think so, yeah.
No. Thompson Ahern gives you premium service. Let's go on to the next slide. So,
That was not a paid commercial.
no, not at all.
But it didn't hurt, though.
No. Hey, Thompson Ahern invited us here today to help you with this, so we're here to do just that. We want you to understand. This is the list of the cargo data that highway carriers must submit. There's a manifest there beside my paperwork there. Yeah, right underneath that document. Yeah. So this is a highway manifest. This is what a truck driver had to fill out. And if I numbered one of these, I numbered 1,500,000. And now this is what he's got to do electronically. So Oryst's buddy there, Joe from Arkansas, he couldn't get this right. What do you think he's doing with this? Not a hope in hell. Huh? God bless him, not a hope in hell.
I want to
Oh, there's no...
It's in your car.
There's no carrier advanced commercial. They don't have to report this. Hand-carried goods is exempt from having to prepare or present ACI.
You have to make the importer declaration.
Yes.
But you can do that at the border. Remember I said...
Some of the concerns we've had with that are that some of the hand-carried good carriers, they got an 18-foot box on a 3-ton truck that's got a lot of freight in it, but it's their own truck. They're moving their own goods. The carrier, the truck is their own truck. It's not for hire. They don't have a separate records for their transportation division. Because they don't meet any of those criteria, they're not issued many have asked for carrier codes. Some had carrier codes that were rescinded. Those that asked were told no because of the fact that they're to use HCGH. The only thing I remind you when you look at this slide that there's one of 3 letters after each element. M for mandatory, C for conditional, O for optional. So the easiest example, I guess, of that is optional example would be if it's not moving in bond, you don't have a seal number. Or if not carrying UN dangerous goods, you don't have a UN dangerous goods number. So that's the easiest thing. But just remember that. We'll go ahead to the next slide for the conveyance. This is the descriptor for all the equipment that's moving the freight into Canada. And again, there's the same one of 3 letters. There's nothing that's optional for them. It's either mandatory or conditional. And remember that some of the conditional elements may change. So for carriers, they have to be careful about that as we approach end state, for example, not only will date of arrival be important, but time of arrival will be important as well. And date of arrival is now mandatory, but that time of arrival is optional at the present time, will likely become mandatory as we approach end state.
Normally they'll give us 30 days.
Sorry, tractor plate in province and state is mandatory. I'd say that's probably a typo. Oh, trailer. Sorry. Yeah. I guess, I don't know. They probably put that in because of bobtail, and bobtail's exempt from this anyway. But let me just say something about that, though. That's all based on the premise that we do not require driver information. So, because that's the big complaint, and it's been an element of confusion with us. Our American counterparts clearly identified it as an oversight. When they implemented their ACE, they did not want empties to report to them. So what they realized after the fact, though, is that everyone else coming in had to give them driver data. And with the empties, they weren't getting the driver data. So they realized that was a gap. So they said to us very clearly, because we do consult with them on a regular basis, they said, don't make the mistake we did, mandate empties right up front. So right now, empties are reporting. They report conveyance data. Obviously, they have no cargo, but when they submit their advanced commercial information, they do a conveyance report, attach a conveyance number. There's no cargo control number, and they have to indicate that they're an empty. And then eventually, once we get the authorization from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, then we too will require driver data. A couple of the major carriers that already have been in production for a couple of years just took their U.S. requirements that they were using, flipped them over and adapted them, and then transmitted to us. And that includes driver data. Well, we said, well, we're not allowed to have driver data. They said, we really don't care. We know you're going to ask for it, so eventually, so you're getting it now. So we dumped that information because we have no legal right to that information. Now, the crazy thing is I really don't know what was said to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner about ACI because, like Oryst already has articulated to you, we've had CDRP, the driver registration program with carded drivers with a photograph and a barcode for years. So I don't know. There's some sort of discrepancy that they're in the process of dealing with, and as soon as it's dealt with, then we will require driver information. Some exemptions to the cargo and conveyance data include emergency response vehicles. CSA, as Oryst has already articulated to you, is exempt from having to provide advanced commercial information. And this is an exemption from cargo and conveyance data, okay? U.S. Customs turnarounds, continuous transmission commodities, military goods on board, a military-owned or leased conveyance. Bobtails right now are exempt from cargo and conveyance. But as soon as we add driver data, bobtails will be removed from this list. They'll have to send us a conveyance report identifying that they're coming to Canada with all the driver information. So just bear that in mind because by end state, that'll all be in place. Mail, full loads of mail are exempt from having to report. Hand-carried goods are exempt. In-transit movements are exempt. Goods originating in the United States, moving in transit through Canada, going back into the United States, are exempt from having to file ACI. However, if a carrier goes down to Newark, New Jersey, loads a container off of a ship onto his truck, drives it up into Canada to St. Stephen, New Brunswick, and wants to move in transit through Canada to Halifax because that container is going out on another ship, they must provide cargo and conveyance information to us because those goods do not originate in the United States or Canada, basically. This goes back to the concept Oryst was talking about earlier, the North American concept. When freight comes off the continent and then moves through the continent to go somewhere else, that has to be reported. Empties for CSA fast carriers with a CDRP fast approved driver. Because we talk about CSA being exempt from ACI, that's a full clean CSA shipment. So you have CSA importer, CSA carrier, and CSA identified goods. That's nice and simple. If that CSA carrier he's got 20 feet left on that 53-footer. He says, I got room for another 3 pallets there. He'll pick up another shipment, but if he picks up another shipment and it's not part of that CSA, then he has to file a cargo and conveyance report, identify that he has CSA goods which are exempt, but then he has to provide the cargo detail on those other 3 pallets. So we don't want to exclude them from doing that, but they have a reporting requirement when they do. Then when they're coming back empty, it has to be a CDRP fast driver and a CSA-approved carrier that is exempt from providing advanced commercial information. Ancillary equipment, that's dollies and things that carriers use to connect to 20-foot trailers and so on. Go ahead. Exemptions to cargo include goods coming into the LVS program, flying trucks. Now this is where they have to provide us a conveyance report, but they don't have to give us cargo detail.
I think you need to explain flying trucks. Flying trucks
I was just going to go ahead. Yeah, just a flying truck is an example of the load comes down in Chicago. It's on an I-8 away bill, which has extensive detail. It's a hell of a lot more detailed than this manifest is. And because of that, we preclude them from having to file the cargo information. All they have to do is identify the conveyance information. So they do a conveyance report, and then they tick off in their electronic report that they have flying cargo. In other words, the cargo is identified on an I-8 away bill. So that's exempt from the cargo data, but the carrier still has to report their trip coming in. Instruments of international trade, approved like racks that are used in the automotive industry. The carrier still has to file a conveyance report. They don't have to file any cargo data. When they have mail as part of a mixed load, the mail is exempt the cargo report. But again, that guy's got 4 pallets of mail. He's got 2 other pallets of freight. Has to file a conveyance report, tell us the equipment that's coming to Canada. He identifies that he's got international mail, which is exempt from cargo detail, and then he has to provide us the cargo detail on the balance of what's on that trailer. And then empties at the tractor level only. Well, empties coming back require a trip report or a conveyance reference report, and eventually driver detail will be added to that. If they don't have cargo, they just file a conveyance report, indicate that they're empty, coming back, and then it's good to go.
So things that are a little gray.
And then painfully a reality of the operation still.
And eventually,
Is the B4, for example, for personal effects, the release of personal effects, that was a paper form when Oryst started his career. It still is a paper document today. Well, E29Bs are still paper. There are circumstances where they're considered out of scope for the advanced commercial information process, but they're a part of the reality in commercial operations still. So there's that marriage of both. Go ahead. Freight forwarder data. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but just for you to know and to understand that there is a data set, we'll go ahead, for them. This is what their house bill data set looks like. Again, there's mandatory elements, conditional, and then optional. And then the business-to-business option here is something that the Canadian International Freight Forwarders Association really features because it allows for business-to-business notation. So it's an open field in the electronic transmission so that when it's shared, the detail will be there. Because remember, cargo and house bill information can be identified by the carrier to be shared with various other parties associated to that transaction. Good workshop, though, because there's opportunity to not only be exposed to the information, but then there's time to have the discussion right then and there and notate what your strategy would be.
at the CIFA website, you'll see the times and the frames and the hotels and stuff, if that's what you're interested in.
Yep. All right. We'll go ahead. Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, that's exactly what they said. But this is just like the carrier. This is just like the carrier community said to us. Where are we going to get all this information? Where do you think they're going to get it? Do you think they're going to get it from the vendor? They barely got a bill of lading that says, who it's from and where it's going. They don't have near the detail they need. And where they're getting it is, and this stems from a large part of the work Oryst's doing to try and get all of the trade chain partners to more effectively communicate. The importer's got to make sure that the broker has that information in plenty of time because essentially the broker is that pivotal role in that process where that information all moves through. And if they're not a part of that process, and my experience in 30 years, especially when I worked at the border, I never ever once met a carrier who came in. Often they'd show up 3 o'clock in the morning with a $50,000 load of fresh produce, and all they had was a bill of lading. And they were never asking me if they had a phone to call the vendor or the shipper or even the importer. All they knew is they needed a broker to make the wheels roll on that truck. So that's how critical the broker has been in the process, and I believe will continue to be in the process. So that the freight forwarders are going to have to more effectively communicate. And like Oryst, when we had the aha moment there with our friend here in Toronto last winter, it was, so now, and he knew then, like Oryst said, 724. And that was a real departure for that fellow. Oryst talks about end state. The other thing I'll tell you here is remember this. There's always a relationship between description and HS. Now, I'm not going to tell you that we expect the description because the carrier has to put a description in there for the cargo that they have. Now, we're not expecting section and verse from the customs tariff. Lord God, we'd have to have electronic systems the size of the universe. But there's going to have to be, eventually, a connection between that HS code and what that descriptor is. Because otherwise, that discrepancy is a real easy systems rejection. So they'll be looking for a match between the HS code and key wording from the description in the tariff. I fully expect. And the description has been a historical, ongoing issue with all of that. So, we'll go ahead. Freight forwarder will provide house bills and the house bill detail, and then they have to provide the close message to say, we have nothing further to declare. There, we've given you all of the information. So the primary carrier then will have that, and with the house bill detail and the closed message, then they can have the confidence that they can move ahead. Because once that's submitted and accepted by the agency, that closed message becomes very important for the carrier to be able to report. All right, we'll go ahead. Importer data, you'll be identified obviously by business number. We'll go ahead one more. And this is the data set, or the ATD, for the importers to have to provide. Now, one thing I will tell you, Oryst has talked about this extensively, and you'll hear more about this before we leave today. But manufacturer and shipper manufacturer is in the agency is already in the process of adding manufacturer to the data set for PARS. Because for an importer to have to provide this, now the one thing I want to tell you, if you provide ATD, whatever the importer provides has to be provided according to the time frames that you saw in that slide with all the clocks. Remember the bottom line? I said importers have to, if the cargo is coming by marine, they'll have to provide their ATD 24 hours prior to loading. In rail, or in air, 4 hours. In rail, 2. In highway, 1. So, do you want all that interaction going on 1 hour, 2 hours before that freight moves? My recommendation or my suggestion is no, you don't. You want it backed up. That's why you can submit that information at the present time up to 30 days in advance, and then hopefully as we move forward up to 90 days prior to arrival. To give you that flexibility, and this is the change in your operation, to have to gather and make sure that that information is each party has the information and that it's all submitted. Our system matches it in the system by the cargo control number, and then from there you get the green lights to proceed. Well, I'll give you an example. In highway, when we have that, it depends on how many bills of lading there are, and that's what controls that. Because our regulatory requirements have to work with the highway carrier requirements. So if that highway carrier makes 4 stops, each stop he picks up freight, he's got a bill of lading for each stop. While the highway reg says for every bill of lading, he has to have a manifest. For every manifest, you have to have a cargo control number. So he's got 1 importer, but he's got 4 bills of lading with 4 manifests. 14 or 40. Or 14 or 40. And when he gets to the border, and before he gets to the border, his advanced commercial report is going to have to report all of that, each one of those, because you have to have a release mechanism for each cargo control number. Well, the U.S. PAPS system right now allows for the release of multiple cargo control numbers on one PAPS because you got 1 importer. And that's the other consideration. But that's for discussion and consultation. Well, the truck shouldn't show. Here's where I'll take that one step further. End state would be that carrier should never show up at the border until all of that information submitted is accepted. So the correction essentially would take place beforehand, so that once he gets the accepted message, then proceed to the border. Because if he does so at end state prior to that, then there's a penalty. Well, I don't know. That's and neither am I. I mean, you're talking about valuation and classification. Like, is it considered U.S. goods? Is it, I mean, technically, once goods are duty paid into the United States, from a technical aspect, they're considered to be U.S. goods. They essentially have been consumed into the U.S. economy, and they make their direct trip, uninterrupted journey to Canada from that source in the United States. I'm not a classification valuation expert. They might have issues, especially when you get to certain commodities, I would say. For many, no, but for certain ones there, it can get pretty delicate. Yeah. Oh, it's not subject. It's excluded from NAFTA then, eh? Yeah. Anyone that's authorized, yeah. Okay. FPOA is the acronym that stands for First Point of Arrival. Okay. Let me just, I was going to try this explanation, and we'll see if this works. Oryst just explained that ATD at end state will still allow your goods to move in bond and clear post FPOA. The best example of an alternate to providing ATD, and which would exempt the importer from having to provide this, is to provide PARs. That's part of the reason why we've already made the decision as an agency to accept PARs 90 days prior to arrival. So this goes back to that concept of the thing about PARs, and your explanation is very clear, Rod, about FPOA. PARs releases that shipment at FPOA. Where it goes after that doesn't matter to us, and it allows for flexibility for transporters, carriers, and importers. It's released at the first point of arrival. Where it goes after that doesn't, no CW, no C, no H, no, forget it. It just moves forward. That, against an account security of the broker, releases those goods. In other words, our agency is assured they'll get their revenue because the account security of the broker that provided that PARs. As far as we're concerned, it moves forward. Now, that exempts the importer from having to file ATD. So if you choose to use PARs, you don't have to file ATD. Now, Orst's point was, if you are unable to provide PARs and you still provide ATD, it will allow your shipment to move in bond and clear at another warehouse located, identified by a sublock code, who is electronically connected to the agency.
I'm afraid forward.
We've already talked about this, and so I don't have to explain this to you. We'll go ahead one more. These are some of the other exceptions to ATD. E29Bs, which are still paper, diplomatic or military goods. OIC is the acronym for Order in Council. Canadian goods refused entry to the U.S. For carriers, non-commercial goods, goods astray, and then non-emergency repairs for those authorized carriers. Okay, we'll go one more time. So there's three fundamental options to transmit to our agency all of this information. EDI being the primary, and the second one you see here is service providers. So Thompson Ahern is a service provider for the importing community, and they expedite freight through the customs process. So I can tell you right now, of the 27,000 highway carriers we have registered with the CBSA, about 5,000 of those are sort of active. The top 500 carriers in Canada that account for 75% of our cross-border movement are in production. They have been transmitting, and they are today transmitting cargo and conveyance data to us electronically and in advance. Over 90% of those carriers are using a service provider. They're not doing it themselves. They've established, the third option, of course, is the eManifest portal. They've established a portal account, and they've taken their service provider, nominated them as a proxy account owner to administer their portal account for them. And that portal account has messaging. And that's the key part that they like about the portal account. Now, what I can tell you is, even though the submission is made by EDI, that portal account will automatically update with that information. So those systems are connected. And that works very effectively right now. And that messaging, once the freight forwarder becomes available next month, excuse me, will include Manifest Forward information. Manifest Forward allows for the notification of the sharing, the electronic sharing of cargo and house bill information. Now, commencing next month with freight forwarders, it'll only be house bill information initially. And then once we get to build 1 down the road, the next phase, the next iteration of our web portal will allow for the electronic identification of other trade chain partners to that transaction to be sent an electronic message with all of the cargo detail and or house bill detail, not conveyance. The other thing about portal is the portal has messaging. So you'll know, you can look into the portal account to see that the cargo detail has been submitted and accepted. You can see that the conveyance information has been submitted and accepted. You can see that there's a match message there, which tells you that the PARS has been put into the system, and our system has matched it by the cargo control number. All of that messaging, and then when the truck arrives at the border, the officer scans the barcode on the lead sheet, and that presents to our officer in our cross-commercial system the arrival option, so it automatically arrives the cargo and conveyance. You get an automatic message telling you that your cargo and conveyance has arrived at the border. Once that officer does the F6 enter and releases it, there's a message from across that goes out that gives you the RNS, but our system will show the cargo control number in the inventory has been acquitted, which means your shipment has been released. So let me go back to the carrier who identifies, or freight forwarder who identifies secondary notified parties, or SNPs. That means you as an importer, you as a broker associated to that transaction will receive that messaging. So you'll know what the status is. Now, it's not as effective as, Canada Post giving you a barcode and giving you a number to call so you can find out exactly, or a courier scanning a barcode to tell you your parcel is on the back of truck number 123 and, it's almost there. We are not that good, but we can at least give you some effective messaging to help you better organize your business and have an understanding of what the process is. This is just some information about the portal. And the portal, our web portal, make no mistake about it, is a transmission tool and a mechanism only. It's not a systems to manage your data. There's no database capability. The data that goes into that portal will remain in that portal for a maximum of 120 days, and then it disappears. Now, those portal transmissions will allow you to either download a PDF version of your transmission or any reports that come out of there, or it'll allow you to download, either print or download the PDF version for you to maintain your effective records. Now, that's why over 90% of the carriers in production today are using a service provider, because when a service provider gets involved, they offer you the full range, the full suite of services. Just like as an importer, you need not be concerned about audit, for example, because your broker looks after that. They support you in that process. They help you with maintaining your records. All right, we'll go ahead. Boy, these are fancy. I love this. Demi did this for us. She had all the sequencing. Nice work. Very nice work. This is an example of... Yes. This is an example of what the screen looks like in the portal for a highway cargo control document to be submitted. And this is the general detail here. Remember I referred to the CSA issue? This is where you identify that there's CSA. This is the general detail. This is the port-specific detail. This is the addresses, and then this is the cargo. He's back. So we'll go ahead. The next screen is another screenshot from the portal, and this is a house bill that the freight forwarder will submit. And then the next one is the, closed message, house bill closed message. So this is where the cargo control number is identified, and then the list of associated house bill numbers. So that's how our system connects everything, through the primary cargo control number. All the house bill numbers are all attached to that. We'll go ahead. So setting up your accounts, this is what's, I'm not going to get into that detail. The detail will be, they're going to get a copy of this. That's great. You'll have a copy of it. So in the interest of time, we're going to have to go a little bit quicker. We had a few more questions than we thought of, but it's been great. So, how to establish your portal account, the details are all there. And this GC key from PWGSC, or Public Works and Government Services Canada, what that is an acknowledgement. Every time you sign on to that portal account, you have to accept the terms and conditions of transmitting that information to the Government of Canada. And that's a legal, very important legal process that's part of this, because our Section 107 of the Customs Act is extremely restrictive on what we can share as proprietary information as an agency that's provided to us for the purposes of importation. And that's why our legal people first balked at this until they saw what that was. And once they realized that terms and conditions are accepted by that person transmitting, and it's all electronically mapped, so there's a full audit capability, they accepted it. We'll go ahead. This is the notifications. I've already talked about notification. We've explained manifest forward and completeness. And this is the matched message Oryst was talking about. This is when the advanced commercial information provided by the carrier is matched to the data from the importer or broker to say that's the green lights for the carrier then to proceed to the border. All right? We'll go ahead. Border process, the information's provided, cargo, conveyance, accepted, the PARS information is provided, it's submitted, recommended for release, the system matches it, that's when the carrier arrives at the border. They arrive, they have a lead sheet with the conveyance, barcoded conveyance reference number, or a barcoded cargo control number, which can be a PARS barcode. Our officer scans that, it immediately takes our officers to options for the release, for the arrival of the conveyance, and 976 is the service option for the arrival of the conveyance. 984 is the service option for the arrival of the cargo. That arrives it in the system. You'll get those messages from as a secondary notified party. And then the next thing our officer is looking for usually, service option 125, which is PARS, that's in a recommended release status. If everything appears okay to them, they release it, down the road it goes. Your broker will look after your final accounting within the 5 business days from that point. Go ahead. Oh, well, I'm not going to get into this detail because it's carrier, very heavily carrier related. We'll just go ahead. And managing your records. Carriers and freight forwarders are responsible to maintain effective records 3 years plus current. Importers, 6 years plus current. And the challenge for our carriers is they don't have a service provider unless they've engaged one to make sure that their records, because there are audits already underway. And right now there's no penalties, but they're issuing what they refer to as a report card, identifying the strengths and then the weaknesses and some recommendations on how to improve their transmissions. And we'll go ahead. So the encouragement is obviously for early adoption. And as Oryst says, 1 year, 14 months, 15 months goes very quickly. In IT terms, 2 years is quick. So that's why Oryst said to you very early this morning, you need to go back and talk to your COO, CEO, CIO, CFO, whoever it is that holds the purse strings, so that they're aware of what may be required of you. And the other element is to communicate with your broker as an importer. And obviously, the early adoption allows you to engage the process when it's first available to you so that there are no penalties. You can streamline your business practices without having to worry about being penalized. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, as a regulatory agency, that's part of our mandate, is to establish what the parameters are and what you must function within. And I think this is the cover sheet of what the ECCRD is, the Electronic Commerce Client Requirements document. They're available online at our website. And those are the business rules essentially associated to the process. And checklist, give you some ideas on what you might want to discuss in making these decisions. Have you reviewed the applicable sections that apply to you? Do you have a valid client identifier? Questions about data elements? Have you chosen a transmission option? Are you prepared to maintain the data effective records? And if you have any questions, you can check with our help desk. If you're an importer, a member of the importing community, talk to your customs broker, freight forwarder, who are also involved in preparing themselves for this very process. And I'm done. Thank you very much. Here, you do the talking.
All right, let me do. I have 5 minutes left, and then we have a short Q&A.
Well, we've got a piece on our eManifest.
And then, is there anybody who's gluten intolerant or tolerant or whatever they call that? Well, that's good because we got pasta back there that looks really good. And lasagna and noodles. All right, I'm going to walk through a typical shipment in a highway mode. I'm a driver in a truck. Okay? So, my dispatcher has said, Oryst, go pick up a shipment at such and such a location. And I'm picking up electronic equipment. Okay? That electronic equipment is at this location in the United States. So I'm going to that location. And we meet. How you doing? And I had a shipment. Great. Take it on my truck. And I load it. And she gives me an invoice. And I have a bill of lading. And I may have another government department's permit or certificates, right? So far, so good. I take that, and I put my barcoded sticker on there for pirate purposes. Would you mind taking this and faxing it to my customs broker? Screw you. Did you hear what she said?
She must work for customs. I said that out loud.
It happens all the time. Okay? You're just a driver. You know, I'm busy here. In fact, I'm standing in a cage because I'm CT pad or the company. They won't allow a driver to pass that yellow line or those fences. So she said no. So I'm here going, right? Now what do? I got to go somewhere else. I got to go to the truck stop, right? So I go to the truck stop. Will you fax this for me? Of course he will. Hey, all right, give me $14 and $1 a page and $18 for service charge, right? He'll do that for me, right? So the number one point for importers to think is that talk to this shipper. They're helping you. She doesn't even know that she can help out in this scenario, okay, to fax it for me because I'm stuck. I need to get that to the broker. So I'm going to ask you again, will you fax this for me? So yeah, screw you again. Yeah. You have talked to her, okay, and you've trained her in a very short period of time. Would you fax that when I get our shipment? It's very important to fax it to Taco, right? Very simple. But if she doesn't know, she's going to say, get out of here. I got another driver waiting, and I'm not going to bother. And I can see that damn fax machine right there, you know, right? It happens all the time, more often than you think. So now I have to figure out what I'm going to do with this. So I can go to truck stop or whatever the case might be to be able to get that information. And that's what happens a lot. And nowadays they've got fax things in their trucks now and all sorts of things that make into the office space. But how can you help? Taco's going to tell you how you can help. Okay? And they'll be meeting with you. The sales guys will be meeting with you. Here's how we can work together to get this kind of thing done. So she does fax it. Okay? And she faxes it to the broker, and the broker takes it right off the fax machine, right away, puts it into the system, and it's done, right? What do you mean? That's what I was told you guys do. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. It's that quick, right? Immediately. So it gets into the system, and so I've met my first requirement. Okay? So if you can go back to my slides when you can, that's the first one. So just to go when you get back there. It's the first piece of that cargo piece that they're doing the PARS process. Okay? And that PARS process is the beginning of ATD or the beginning of PARS, depending on the scenario that might happen. One more down. And one more. That's the one. Okay? Thank you. That's this piece. Okay? So I've asked her to do that. She's faxed it for me. The broker took it off the machine and put that into the system. It's in the system. Okay? Now, I'm still out here, right? Excuse me. Would you mind faxing that to my dispatch as well? I'm pushing it now, aren't I? Right? But I'm in that stage now. Somebody's got to key it in for me, so I'm assuming my dispatch will do it. So she's been kind enough, because she's been trained, she's faxed it to my dispatcher. Or I go to Uncle Henry. Would you do it for me? Or Aunt Mary? Or my daughter? Somebody's got to key. Or I go to the machine, and I do it. Okay? I'm putting the business reality into it. Okay? So that's a Ma type carrier, Joe from Arkansas, intermediate. Now, big carrier who's got back-end systems and all bill of ladings, and they'll be sending that from the back-end system. But a lot of carriers are still doing what I just walked through here. Okay? So when that goes in the system, now I have somebody who's keyed it in here for me. Or I've keyed it in. So now I have an accepted and I have an accepted in the system. Technically I have a go message, right? Both have accepted. So a go message, I'm going to the border. If I have a go message and I don't have this message, don't go. Go to Tim Hortons, Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah, go to the truck stop until you get the go message. Then I'm assured when I come to see the customs inspector, I give him my card and I give him my barcoded lead sheet, wands it into the system, and it's done. Released, and away we go at the Frontier Port. If I have to go get an examination done, well, that's fine. I can go and get an examination done. I go inside, do an exam. If I've got multiple shipments on there, I think it was you that said, or somebody that said, failure is failure of the whole thing. I got to examine one, the whole thing goes in, one gets examined, but the others are held hostage until that examination is done. Right? That's part of reality. That's right. Happens too often. Okay, and then I deliver it, I get my POD, and I go back to my dispatch, and my job is done. And I can translate that very same thing into the air mode, which I just did. I walked through the air piece, and the marine mode is the same thing. Except I'm not dealing with a customs inspector, I'm dealing with an arrival message telling that it's arrived. I told you this morning that you'd be smarter at the end of the day than when you walked in here today. That true? Then we've done our job. Thank you very much. We're here for lunch and everything else, so thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'd like to ask Sean if he wouldn't mind just delivering our ACI eManifest. I just wanted to add a couple of pieces here that when we were working in the agency developing the eManifest back to carrier re-engineering, one of the things that CBSA didn't realize, because they did 97% of the work transmitted to them EDI, they thought we got the information EDI.
So we can go to the slide. We partnered with SmartBorder for our ACE solution before ACI was beginning its implementation, and when we decided to start looking for an ACI provider, we stuck with SmartBorder there as well. For our clients, it's going to offer a single solution for both sides of the border, whether you're traveling north from the U.S. or south from Canada. You're going to be using the same software. It's going to have the same look, the same feel. It might not necessarily be the same module, but it's going to look and feel the same all the way through. Both of the SmartBorder solutions, both north and southbound, are internet accessible. They can be accessed and utilized anywhere you have an internet connection, anywhere in the world. So your information follows you wherever you go. And some of the features that we see here are kind of features that you're not going to get when you're using the portal, and that's something that I think was touched on earlier. The information being stored inside our software, the easy point-and-click user interface, all of that does take place within our solution. So all of your commodity data, shipper, consignee data, the M's that we saw on the big lists there, the mandatory information, the conditional information. The system takes all of those different requirements and allows a really easy interface for the user to navigate. So we'll go through, and there'll be a place where we see that mandatory fields are highlighted in yellow, and when the mandatory fields are highlighted in yellow, you have to fill it in. When you start filling in conditional data, it'll highlight itself in yellow when it does become mandatory, when that condition is met. So the platform itself really takes a lot of the work out of it for you. Manifest defaults for repeat shipments. So an operator also acting as the importer, bringing stuff down to the same place from the same location through the same port. All of those defaults can be stored. Templates can be created, so you're not recreating your shipment, your conveyance, your cargo. All of that isn't being recreated every single time. You can really start, change a few dates, change the times, estimated time of arrival, etc., and be able to transmit right away. So you're not recreating every single manifest that you do.
Good question. Anybody here who has their own trucks moving back and forth across the border? You're using your own carriers? Just wanted to see.
So the defaults and the templates are very in-depth. Really allows you to customize the software to do whatever it is you need it to do and save you a lot of time, keystrokes, etc. Immediate submissions and responses, so it's all live, tracking all the way through. And one of the great pieces of this is, and we heard several times, if you don't have everything matching, don't go. This gives you a countdown timer. So you're going to see a big red box that says 59, 58, 57, all the way through down to 0. And then you get a nice big green go button. So you get to track live when it is you're allowed to cross the border, when it is everything, when all of your requirements have been met. And it'll give you a nice countdown ticker. Go to the next slide. So speaking of the tracking, we have live tracking, shows when you're okay to go. Bring up a picture of that. So we see here where it says safe to arrive. So that's where we're going to see our green go. And prior to this, be red with your countdown ticker as to how much time you have until it's safe to arrive. And that way you can always be certain, the carrier is always going to be certain that when they do show up, they're okay to actually be there. All the information's married, and they've given their 1 hour notification if we're speaking in terms of the highway. The border itself. So this is live and does give you precise indication as to when it is you are allowed to arrive at the border. And the shipment trip defaults, this is going to be a look at how it is you can default all of this various information in here, what type of bill of lading, all the way through to your shipper, consignee, what port you're arriving at, etc. All of that can be defaulted through, so you're not recreating your cargo, your shipment, etc. every single time you open up the software. And some of the other defaults are going to pertain to cargo control numbers or shipment control numbers, whether or not they're going to be assigned in order, in any particular order, whether or not they're just going to be, your default's going to be that random numbers are assigned, etc. So all of that different, all the different keystrokes that would normally be required when you're using the portal, etc., aren't going to be there for you. It's going to save you a lot of time when you're going through and keying particular parts of the manifest. And one of the big pieces are your pick lists. All of your information is stored here. So when we're talking about any form of manufacturer, consignee data, your truck, trailer types, the licenses for your crew members, the license plates, VIN numbers when you're going down into the U.S., etc. All of that, every piece of information is stored. So you're not looking for a whole lot of information when you are keying your shipments. So when you're running around to find your license before the portal times you out, you don't have to do any of that. There really is no running around. It's all stored there for you. And one of the other good pieces of this is that it keeps a constant link with the server itself. You're not timing out. It never really does time out. Until you close it, you're active. because all of the information is being fed to you live, so that connection's constantly there. So you're not timing out there either. So from a systems perspective, it kind of gives you all the added benefits that you're not going to get when you're using one of the free-to-use portals. And you're going to see, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. And it works two ways. So we can actually act as the service center for your carrier, and at the same time, we can also give them access to their own portal through SmartBorder. So they can actually have a copy of the software licensed to them directly on their system. They're filing their own just through us. We're there for support if they need it. Or again, we can also file the eManifest for them directly. Mandatory fields I touched on being highlighted in yellow. Really important because we looked at those, the PowerPoint slides where we saw what was mandatory, what was conditional, what was optional, and for somebody to have all of those up around them and know exactly what it is they have to be filling in, or to get all the way through, hit submit, and be stopped, it's kind of a pain. It really delays the process. So here, as you're keying, the system's going to tell you and explain to you exactly what it is you have to be filling in. And when you do add in, speaking to a southbound shipment coming into the U.S., when there are toxic goods on there, stuff that requires TSCA, it's going to stop you and ask for additional information. So when conditional data does become important, the system will stop you and let you know what it is you need to fill in. So it does kind of follow you all the way through the entire process and alert you as to what information is required prior to actually submitting. Any questions on the SmartBorder piece itself? Good to go. Sure.
I had the opportunity to actually work on a cat shop app, and it is great. I mean, fields are populated, like you said, I mean, it's scale, it's easy to connect, it's so good.
Yeah, it does save a lot of time. All right.
Thanks, Sean. So on behalf of Thompson Ahern, I'd like to say a special thank you to both Oryst and James today, and a small token of our appreciation. While you're traveling in Italy, taking pictures, and
You have to declare
maybe